Well, Mike for sure, because he is unfortunately developed an extremely large following and simply lies to people relentlessly. This is not how they train during the majority of they train just like everybody else. But you can't say that and stay relevant in social media these days. Because if these people thought I was so wrong, if they're so much smarter than me, if they're so much better than me, why can't they defend the science? No, 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 no. A flexible eater may choose not to eat a certain food because they're trying to reach a goal. A rigid eater will not eat that food because moralistically they think it's bad.
All right, so I want to kick things off talking about flexible dieting.
Yeah.
Not rigid, clean eating rules dominated. You published a guide to flexible dieting in 2004, introducing ideas that people could incorporate like free meals, free feeds, or even cheat days. Today, the concept has gone mainstream in the if it fits your macros trend.
Right.
Do you feel the flexible diet messaging that you pioneered has been misunderstood or oversimplified? And if so, what key nuance would you wish more people recognize?
So the answer is absolutely yes. And I'm partly responsible for this. Although if you read my book carefully, I tried to explain this. So in a research sense, the idea of rigid versus flexible eating, and by this I mean rigid eaters see food as good or bad, clean or unclean, healthy or unhealthy. Like it's a very black and white. They call it dichotomous situation. Flexible eaters don't do that. It's just food, right? So it's really a way of thinking about food. And there are a set of behaviors. The guy Weston Hofer, who developed the whole idea back in the 90s, that he found that certain behaviors on a different questionnaire tended to associate with those attitudes. But it's your way of thinking, right? It doesn't say anything necessarily about how you do or do not eat, right? So if we were to take two athletes, two physique athletes, whatever, their diets might look identical. But let's say that they both, have a lapse. They eat something that's not allowed, right? Like so a bodybuilder eats an unclean food, whatever is being defined as unclean that week. And the other individual eats that same unclean food. The difference between the rigid eater and the flexible eater would be in how they respond to it, right? The rigid eater would be like, oh my God, I've eaten an unclean food. I broke my diet. I'm a bad person. Like there's a very moralistic um, psychology to it. And that frequently leads down the path of, well, since I've already messed up the entirety of today, I might as well go nuts. And you would see that at the extremes back in the 2000s on some of the physique form, where someone would have a tablespoon of cream, which is unclean, and go, well, day's ruined. Might as well go eat four milkshakes, right? Like it's this so that's rigid eating attitudes. And then flexible eating attitudes, the flexible eater might do one of the couple of things. They might realize it doesn't matter and move on with their damn lives. They might, let's say that they had a bigger lapse than, a tablespoon of cream, whatever. They had a couple hundred calories over their goal of whatever it was. They might adjust that slightly the next day by reducing calories slightly to compensate. And many would just move on. So it's really, in the strictest sense, it is about how you think about eating. The problem is that it's very difficult to change the way people think about eating them by telling them, hey, don't think that way, right? That's not how human psychology works. If someone is really locked into that rigid mode of eating, you can't just tell them to not do that. So what and I didn't invent any of these ideas, right? Like all the things I talked about in my initial book, those had been in the physique subculture more so than general population for decades. Although I did change the terminology and I've changed them more even since then, right? So the ideas that I presented were the free meal. Now back in the day, this was called the cheat meal, and some people still call it that. I don't like that terminology for a couple reasons. One is cheat has no positive connotations, right? Like you cheat on your test, you cheat on your taxes, you cheat on your significant other. And when people think of it, I'm cheating, they almost go out of their way to eat the worst crap that they can, right? Like, oh, if I'm cheating, I'm going to have a pizza and a pint of ice cream and get cookies on the way home. It also does nothing to break that rigid mentality. If you already see food as good or bad, well, these are cheat foods. These are negative. Like I'm cheating. This is bad. I'm being bad. right? Versus being good. So I called it a free meal. And all it was meant to be was a meal while you were eating for fat loss generally that included something that was otherwise disallowed, whatever that may be. And it depends on the diet. But it was just meant, it was really just a psychological thing. It was like, dieting, eating for fat loss tends to get to be a little bit of a grind. And it's just like sometimes you need a little bit of a break. And it was just one meal. And I had a bunch of rules because, again, people will take one meal and go nuts with it. And they'll be like, oh, well, I had a snack and then I went to the restaurant and I had 2 desserts and then I picked up ice cream on the way home. Oh, that's just a meal. And it's like, come on. People are absolutely their own worst enemies in this regard because of how the human brain can parse this into the worst. So if you read my books, they're desperately overwritten because I have to give the warning 6 times and somebody will still mishear it. Right. So that was the free meal. And it was just like, hey, look, you can do this and you can go back to your diet. Well, except when you can't, because what I know now, 21 years later, some people, free meals are a terrible choice, especially early on. Now, there's a lot of context to this. Who are they? Are they a beginner trying to change long-term, long-standing, I'm going to say bad eating habits. People know what I mean. Not bad. It's just inconsistent with their goals. Let's put it that way. Sometimes doing that will kick them off their eating plan. And they may be better off being stricter initially to break some of those old habits. For someone with well-established eating habits, it may be trivial to do that. And it's very much try it. And if the next day you can go right back to your eating plan, cool. And if you do that and it throws you off, then don't, right? Again, purely psychological. You'll still hear people go, oh, I eat, I have a cheat meal to raise metabolism. Doesn't work that way. Sorry, one meal does nothing. Okay, so the next concept I introduced was the refeed. Now, originally this used to be called the cheat day. And this was even worse than the cheat meal because people truly went nuts, right? Like, because now you give them a day to shovel down as much as they could. Now, there was a book back in the 90s called Body for Life by Bill Phillips. He was the author. He started Muscle Media 2000, one of the best magazines until he decided to just sell out and do supplements and personal training transformation. But he introduced a lot of bodybuilding concepts to general public, higher protein, resistance training. It was a very good book, make no mistake. But he included the cheat day. He said, one day a week, you can eat anything you want. And the stories that came out of that, people would literally get up at 12:01 a.m. and eat constantly the worst crap they could until 11:59. He said one day of cheating. That's
10,000 calories later.
23 hours and 59 minutes. That's one day, right? This is, I learned early on the hard way. Again, this is why my books are written the way that they are. You have to put in so many guidelines and recommendations and people will still probably mess it up. So I came with the refeed concept. Now, at the time, there was a lot of data breaking about leptin and metabolism and all the stuff I won't bore people with here that had to do with, like, we know that metabolism adapts on a diet. And I was hoping that by raising calories mainly as carbs, you could improve hormonal status. And that worked better. And I had this very complicated system based on, like, it could be anywhere from 5 to 48 hours, depending on how lean you were and activity and all these other data points. And the reality is 20 years later, any metabolic effect is small, approaching non-existent, right? Like, I absolutely would not defend that strategy on metabolic purposes. That doesn't mean it doesn't have benefits, right? If you're heavily training, refills muscle carbohydrate, allows you to stay in your training. It does give you a nice little break, right? Like, if I tell someone 7 days a week, you're going to be in a deficit, that is effectively forever. If I give them one day where they can eat normally, suddenly forever becomes only 6 days before you get a break, right? It's the psychology of that is enormous. So there are other benefits to it. It's just the metabolic ones aren't there. Now, refeed was a better term, but in hindsight, that also caused problems. A good friend of mine at the time said, refeeding sounds like something you would do with cattle. And I was used overfeeding. Now, these terms are used in the literature of humans, but they weren't wrong. And I also saw people thinking, refeed, I gotta mainline all the carbohydrates that I can. And they still tended to get out of control. So outside of very specific context, carb loads for athletes, which are a microscopic proportion of who we're talking about, I no longer use that term. They're just maintenance days, right? You're just eating it
Yeah.
And that avoids, like, you're not overfeeding, you're not refeeding, you're just eating in maintenance. And it changes the psychology of it. So that's the big change there. And then finally was the full diet break. And I will actually get back to your original question, believe it or not. The full diet break was an idea that came out of early work by Wing. And as I presented it, it was a 10 to 14 day period at maintenance calorie. Now, the study that came out of originally, right? They wanted to examine what happens when people fall off their diet, right? Like we know that people do generally. They wanted to study that in a controlled sense. So they took a group of people, and it was, I don't remember the exact details, but like they dieted for like 6 weeks, and then they were told take 2 weeks off your diet, and then another group did something slightly differently because they wanted to see what happens. Did they gain weight? Did they overeat? Did they come back? Like what? And the study failed completely in the sense of people didn't overeat, they didn't gain a bunch of weight, and they had no problem returning to their dietary plan. Right? What they were trying to study, they were unable to study, but they made, to me, a much bigger or much more interesting um, discovery, which was that under normal conditions, when people, fail their diets, fall off their diet, whatever, they start eating stuff that's on, they feel guilty, like whatever, the guilt circle, pop psychology BS, like that. And they're just like, okay, I'm weak, I suck, blah, 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 because of all that moralistic nonsense. And they fall off. And they're like, well, I'm just going to go back to eating the way I can because I obviously am too weak willed, et cetera, et cetera. In this case, they were being told by the guys in the lab coats with the clipboards, we want you to take 2 weeks off. And I think they parsed it as, oh, I mean, people in research want to make the guys in the lab coats happy.
Of course.
Often you see different things in research than out in the real world for that reason, because of that. But what I felt was going on to some degree, and this is true of the free meal and the refeed, or the maintenance day rather, was that they saw it as like, oh, this is just part of the plan. I am making a conscious decision to take this break. And that's the difference. There's a difference in, I was weak willed and ate a pizza, and I am choosing to take a free meal. There's a difference between, oh my God, I blew my diet and pigged out at a wedding. I'm choosing to make this a maintenance day. There's a difference between, oh my God, I failed for 2 weeks off my diet because I was on vacation, and I'm choosing to take this break. In the first case, the diet is controlling you. And in the second case, you are controlling the diet. And the psychology of that can be vastly different. And they even concluded at the end of it, they're like, well, we propose that maybe taking deliberate breaks during periods of like vacation and holiday and stuff might be beneficial. And so I'm like, cool. Now that again, that idea had been around. Dan Duchesne back in the day recommended more during contest diets, extreme diets, to raise body temperature and metabolism. I put that was one of the hopes as well, but also is like, number one, it gives you, and again, the data now, if there's an effect, it's small, approaching non-existent. I certainly, again, I wouldn't recommend diet breaks on that standpoint anymore. But that doesn't mean they don't have benefits. One, there's a very real concept called diet fatigue. People get it gets exhausting being in a deficit the whole time. Hunger starts to go up. And the research they've done on bodybuilders found like, yeah, there was no metabolic benefit, but appetite came back down. If you're training, it allows you to, regain any fitness you may have lost, right? But it also is the longer version of breaking your diet into more reasonable blocks, right? Now, this is especially important for people with a lot of fat to lose, right? If you've got, let's say, 100 pounds, you're, suffering from severe overweight or obesity. For me to tell you, you're going to have to diet for 2 years straight, can't be done. You've already, on day one, you've given up. Psychologically, that is absolutely untenable. If I go, I'm going to have you lose fat for 12 weeks and then take a little bit of a break. Well, that's doable. If I then put a maintenance day in once a week, you're going to diet for 6 days at a time.
Yeah.
And then every 12 weeks, you get 2 weeks to eat normally. Right. It's the psychology of it is drastically different. I usually use a driving metaphor, right? Like if you've ever driven cross country, right? It's brutal. I've driven from Nashville to LA many times when I was in college. It's a 36-hour drive. To think I got to drive 36 hours, you can't do it. Well, you can when you're young and stupid, because I did it without a break one time. But I'm not young anymore. So, but if you go, okay, I'm going to drive for 18 hours, or say I'm going to do 12 hours, 3 12-hour days. Well, that's tenable. You get to stop and sleep. That's different. If you then break that 12 hours, go every 3 hours, I'm going to stop to get gas and pee. Then it's like, well, anybody can drive for 3 hours. Very few can drive for 36 hours straight. And dieting is the same way, right? Even high level athletes take 1 day off a week, and they take frequently an easy week every fourth week, and they take 2 easy weeks every year. And yet we expect people seeking fat loss to relentlessly drive themselves every day for months on end. It's psychologically and physiologically untenable. But perhaps the most important reason for general population for taking a diet break is it lets them practice main, because that's the hard bit.
I agree.
It always has been. It gives them an opportunity in a very controlled, chosen situation to go, okay, I'm going to see if I can maintain for these 2 weeks. You give a chance to identify red flags, problems that are going to come up, because then you can address them down the road. So the diet break still has benefit. It's just metabolic ones, or one of them. But so those were the 3 concepts. Now, are those in the literature of flexible eating? Absolutely not. Those come from different ideas. But going back to what I was talking about 4 hours ago, telling someone who's rigid eater, go, just stop eating rigidly, is like telling a cat to dog, right? It doesn't work that way. But you have to show them. You go, look, I just want you to try this. Just like try one meal off your diet. And they do that and go, huh, the world didn't end. I didn't blow up. I didn't go nuts by consciously choosing to do it this way. I was able to stay in control. And suddenly they might go, huh, and they still keep losing fat, and they still, even if they include a maintenance day proactively, and they go, huh, not only did it not inhibit my fat loss, it actually made it easier, because I was able to adhere longer, slowly, through their behavior, and hopefully getting rewarded from it, assuming it works. That can start to change their mental representation of it. So again, those ideas were never in the literature. And certainly if it fits your macros, which I had nothing to do with, was not in the literature. Although I was saying very similar, right? Back in the day, in the early internet days, and I've been on the internet forever. I was there when it started in 94, right? This whole evidence-based, science-based fitness thing, that was me. I started it in 94 as the first guy online pushing science.
Did you have an AOL CD at that time? Like, how did you get online?
4 hours. It was awesome. I had the free 4 hours. That's where I started in college in 94.
I had a stock of those. It was amazing.
But in 94, at that point, we had Usenet. I mean, you had still, like, you had to set up TCP IP. Like, it was not easy to get online. There were like 6 websites. You could literally visit every single one of them on any given day. There were like I never did BBSs. I did AOL forums. Then we got into Usenet. That was early 90s. That was one of the early messaging boards, right? I never did ICQ. I never did AIM for the most part. And then, Usenet gave way to mailing lists or listservs, and then listservs gave way to forums, and forums gave way to MySpace, and MySpace gave way to Facebook and Instagram and TikTok. And now the end of society as we know it. I've been there the whole time, right? So I was there in the beginning. And why was I talking about this? Oh, so if it fits your macros, but at the time I was like, look, you could get lean eating nothing but table sugar and protein powder. Like, it doesn't matter. I'm like, it's calories and protein intake. And I was like, no, you have to eat clean. And that was the mentality of rigid eating and orthorexia and all that stuff. I was saying that. And it's even in my book. I know I mentioned that in flexible eating, but if it fits your macros, people would go, oh, can I eat whatever, a cookie, as long as I maintain the deficit? And guys like Aragon, etc., were like, if it fits your macros. And that's where that came from. Okay. So that's kind of where this all developed. And if it fits your macros was just if you want to replace a couple hundred calories of, clean food. And again, I don't believe the whole clean, unclean thing is nonsense. Hopefully your listeners know what I mean by that. Let's just call it traditional dieting food with a couple hundred calories of whatever. For whatever reason, you want to, you need a psychological break, you're just in the mood for a Pop-Tart, you can do that and it doesn't matter. And that's fine. So that's kind of where it started. But it then took on its own life and became just as dogmatic as the rigid eaters had been initially. Throughout the 2010s, that's when it got really out of control. And what I saw developing, and I really disliked. I mean, on top of people just flat out plagiarizing my concepts without ever giving me credit, what I saw happen, right? Because this is when some of the early stuff on orthorexia was starting to develop. And just for context, orthorexia is kind of a new eating disorder, and it describes people that are pathologically concerned with the healthiness and unhealthiness of foods, right? It actually goes way back to the early 20th century and the idea of like food hygiene. And it's very moralistic and it's very, now, I'm not saying all foods are nutritionally equal. Don't mishear me. Obviously, there are differences between foods in their nutritional quality or whatever, but this is taking it to an unhealthy level. People with orthorexia will just start reducing foods and limiting foods. Oh, this has a little too much sodium. This has 1 gram too many saturated. They actually end up being less healthy because they remove so many foods, they end up nutrient deficient. That's the pathological. And it's a fine line, right? Like there is healthy orthorexia, quote unquote, that is like eating a healthy diet, right? Your typical athletic diet. And then there is unhealthy orthorexia where it becomes so pathological it causes health problems. But the idea of orthorexia was that, oh, orthorexics and also rigid eaters, like orthorexia is rigid eating taken even further. It's at the crossroads of rigid eating and an eating disorder. Was, oh, you can't eat these foods because these foods are bad, right? Now, the if it fits your macros people decided if you're not flexible eating, if you're not using these strategies, you're doing it wrong. And I'm sorry, but that's just as that's rigid. That's just as dogmatic. That's still just as ideological, and it's still just as wrong as the other approach. Because, like, literally, if somebody said, "Hey, if I eat a cookie, it's a trigger food for me. I will eat the entire box, so I don't eat cookies." And the hard line, if it fits your macros, people like, "You're orthorexic." No, 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 no. A flexible eater may choose not to eat a certain food because they're trying to reach a goal. A rigid eater will not eat that food because moralistically they think it's bad. The end result is the same, but the psychology is different. The orthorexic won't eat a food because they think it is morally bad. Someone choosing not to eat a food because it makes sense because it's a trigger for them. It's not any more than for someone to choose not to drink. Right? I don't drink. Why? I just choose not to. I don't enjoy it. I don't like the taste. I prefer not to. That's very different than someone says, alcohol is the drink of the devil. And if you drink it, you're a bad person, right? You are morally unclean if you drink alcohol. Walt is the same, and that's the thing. So the if it fits your macros, we're like, oh, if you're not taking free meals, if you're not doing if it fits your macros, then you're dieting wrong. And that's just as bad.
Yeah, I feel like the challenge there is that people have such religious attitude towards eating, because like clean or unclean, and then flexible dieting became how much junk can I fit and still at my macros, and now that became a tribe as well.
No, that's a misconception. That was the argument that the rigid eaters used. If you were like, oh, I want to have the occasional cookie, they'd be like, hey, if you want to eat pizza for 70% of your calories, it's like, can you people read? Now, and part of the reason that this idea got out there was YouTube, because social media is the internet is why we can't have nice things. You did have people who were like, I'm going to do my entire diet as 90% Pop-Tarts. People were like, oh, if it fits your macros, is the Pop-Tart diet. People took it further. So wait, if I do if it fits your macros, do I have to eat Pop-Tarts? Like, no, I'm not kidding about this. I saw all this develop, but it was just, you had a handful of morons on YouTube going, oh, I got, there was a teacher that did the Twinkie diet. He was doing it to make a point. If it fits your macros in its strictest sense, simply said, if you occasionally want to eat this to substitute for something else, you can. You don't have to. You don't even have to do it every day. If you want to, it's fine. But people misheard the message as either you must do it, right? At one point, Aragon wrote something that it was like the typical, if it fits your macros is 80% traditional dieting foods, traditional clean foods, 10% whatever. And then there was another 10% that had this really weird terminology that I never could figure out what he was talking about. right? But like the average, if it fits your macros person, if you were to look at their eating,
Right.
athletic, physique, whatever, 80 to 90% of their diet, or even 100% most of the time, looks exactly like a rigid eater's diet. They're
Mhm.
eating a typical athletic diet, but every once in a while, if they want to, they can have a little treat. And that's fine. Now,
Yeah.
what was even doubly hilarious, the rigid eaters who were like, oh man, if it fits your macros, people, you're dieting wrong and that's unhealthy. When they had their cheat day or when they broke their diet, they would objectively eat more junk foods in that 24-hour span than any if it fits your macros people ate in a month. But they still saw themselves as morally superior. So the whole thing spun out of control. And it's if it fits your macros, yeah, did people do it just to prove a point? Yeah, I could eat 90% junk food. Like I said, you could do it. You could eat nothing but table sugar for carbs and get enough protein and you would lose fat. I maintain that. People go, are you recommending that? Of course I'm not. Are you an idiot? I'm simply making a principle point. But again, I have to make this explicit in my books. Because if I say that, people are like, oh, Lyle's saying I should eat this way. No, I'm not. I'm trying to make a point about calories and a point about metabolism. Because sugar has a lower glycemic index than rice. And you people think rice is the perfect dieting food. You can't have it both ways. So anyway, it went from what it was originally to it became its own ideology. I don't know where it stands now because I don't care. All I care about is what I say about it, honestly. And even then, and the other part of the problem that I saw, a lot of the really ideological, if it fits your macros people who were like, rigid dieting is bad. They spent 10 years eating rigidly, right? And they're not aware of it. The people who are like, oh, I eat intuitively are just as delusional. Right. Because you spent 10 years tracking every morsel you put in your mouth.
They can do the mental accounting every time they're eating, realistically.
Whether they're doing it consciously or not. Like, because one of the people who pushes that, they're like, oh, I can eat intuitively. And they have like a carefully measured half cup, of cereal. You're not eating intuitively. You have programmed a set of food rules. I can do it too. I can go to any restaurant and pretty much eyeball what's on there.
Yeah,
Whether or not I care, that's a whole separate issue. If I'm at the buffet, I know what I'm eating. I just don't give a damn. Right.
yeah.
So this is a contextual thing. Like I said, some people early on in Gen Pop, and again, I learned this over the last 20 years. I like to think I've learned at least 3 new things, maybe 4 if I'm being optimistic, is for people just starting out, those flexible eating strategies, free meals, maintenance days, and especially if it's your macros, can do more harm than good because you need to break old eating patterns and old eating habits. I had a guy I consulted with, and he was having trouble. And I asked him about that. And I said, okay, have you ever tried maintenance days or whatever? And he said, I did, but the last time I did it, so I could take a maintenance day on Friday and then I would enjoy it. And then I'd take a maintenance day on Saturday and then I would justify another maintenance day on Sunday. And then my diet was over. I'm like, right. That's what can happen.
Mhm.
So I gave him a very strict diet initially. And when we reconvened 2 or 3 months later, and he was like, yes, doing it that way is like, now I can go do a free meal and I'm fine. And I go have that little treat. He goes to Five Guys Burgers and I can go right back on. But he needed that time period to and I'm not going to get into all of the fact that eating is mostly Pavlovian, Skinnerian conditioning. Anyway, you have to break these habits. For him, he would see these foods and he couldn't eat them because the diet had a bright line boundary on him when it comes from alcohol, substance abuse treatment. And by doing that, he broke those associations. Once he'd established better long-term eating habits, he was able, and these fitness people who got 10 years of consistent eating habits that had been drilled into their brain and who were obsessive neurotics to begin with a certain neurochemistry, a certain neurobiology that they're not even aware of. They can do it. And the problem was when they said, if you can't do it, you're doing it wrong. Well, that's just what the rigid people said 20 years ago.
So you're talking about kind of this moralistic issue. You mentioned that you don't drink, but you're not morally opposed to it. Do you feel that same thing is happening right now with GLP-1, where
Well,
I'd love to understand your thoughts. I mean, I know you recently wrote a book, so
sure.
I'd love to understand the moralistic side and then, who you think it may be beneficial.
Right. So the reality is that if you look at the history of weight loss and obesity, and there's a couple really good articles I found at one point online that did, the moralistic ideas surrounding overweight and obesity and food go back centuries, if not long. I mean, look, I don't want to get into anything, with religion. Sloth and gluttony they're two of the seven deadly sins, right? It's built into the system. So there is so much moralizing about people who are, oh, they're lazy, they're, blah, blah, blah. There's that meme I hate so much. Oh, you're overweight because you eat like an asshole, which so helpful. The fitness industry, this is why we can't have nice things, because you tell people that are being misinformed that they're the problem, right? Like, it is so entrenched mentally and psychologically that, oh, just try harder. Right now, something I've talked about and I'm happy to talk about again and I've written about, right? Like, my father dealt with bipolar, and it turns out I had bipolar too. And that caused me to have some interesting experiences when I was younger, that I'm not going to talk about. But for when my father was growing up, mental illness was just you're weak.
Mhm.
Just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Suck it up and try harder. Reagan let out all the schizophrenics in the 1980s. They just need to work harder. Good job, buddy. Thanks. Thanks so much. Now it is normalized that mental illness is a neurochemical condition that requires, not always, right? You can be situationally depressed. I don't want people to mishear me, because they always do, right? You can be depressed for not, like, life sucks. You got fired, you're whatever it is. And frequently you'll come out of that situationally. And there's a neurochemical depression. Bipolar is neurochemical. Schizophrenia is neurochemical. You can't just try harder. And now it is totally normalized. That has become normalized. Now, I'm also not saying that, yeah, do we over medicate when it's probably not needed? Absolutely. Right. I realize that nuanced conversations for most people are difficult, but it's like both extremes are usually wrong.
Mhm.
The extreme of suck it up and try harder was objectively wrong. The psychology of, oh, like, that's, again, I don't want to get into politics. Just try harder. It's all just mental weakness. Um, is just as wrong. Context. Now, obesity and overweight is still in the same place that mental health was 50 years ago. Problem is, it's got far longer of this entrenched ideas. Now, again, I don't want people to mishear me. Are people with overweight generally less active? Yes. Does that mean they're slothful or lazy? No. Right? Modern environment does not require a lot of activity. There are neurochemical aspects of who does or does not engage in more spontaneous activity, who do or do not enjoy exercise. It lives in the dopamine system. And the problem with the fitness industry and people that have never been overweight prattling about this in this moralistic way that just makes me so angry. They don't know, they have no context for what they're talking about because they've never been there. I haven't either, right? I've never been severely overweight except when I did a dreamer bulk in my 20s, but that's a whole separate thing, right? Like, but I can understand it because I can understand the neurobiology, right? There are a couple people in the industry. Heather Robertson is one. She runs the Half Size Me podcast. There's another guy, Darko Bodick, who has showed sense and actually retired from the fitness industry, which if I had any sense, I'd get out too. They were both clinically overweight. They lost they get to have an opinion, right? Because they've been there. They know what's involved, right? Even as far as the overeating thing. Yes. Do people with overweight eat more than lean individuals? Absolutely. However, we've got the modern environment driving food intake, but there are fundamental differences in neurochemistry, in taste buds, in the reward system that are contributing to that. That when you put that neurochemistry in this environment, it's not just a choice. Well, okay, it is, but it isn't. Like, again, this is why this discussion gets so complicated. Like, yeah, in premise, can you make that choice? Yes, in premise, is the average person going to be able to in the modern environment? Good luck. Not when you've got a neurochemistry, like I said, a either hyper or hyposensitive reward system. Let's just don't worry about that. Because what happens, right? So some people love sweets. I love sweets. People I don't. Sumi Singh, my trainee, who I suggested you have her on your podcast to talk about mental strength. She doesn't. She doesn't enjoy treats. Now, why? Is it neurochemical? Is it because it's what she grew up on versus what I grew up on? Don't know, but it doesn't matter. But you take two people, right? You take two kids. One is a hyper taster. They've got taste buds that are super sensitive. They've got a reward system that really, really, really enjoys sweets, and you've got the other that doesn't. Put them in the modern environment. The one is going to start to gain weight. That is going to cause a feed forward cycle in those systems and also when the biology is very plastic, when you're teenage and you can program that stuff and make it essentially permanent. Down the roads, they are going to have severe problems, comparatively speaking, through no real choice of their own. But the fitness industry, which is predominantly made of people that never went through that, they can't see it. They're like, well, I love exercise. Yeah, you're not your clientele, so who gives a damn? I was lucky enough to enjoy activity. My diet growing up was typical middle-class white food, and I was a chunky kid. But when I got into sports, I loved it. I was lucky. And I spent years changing my eating habit, but I was also never extremely overweight. So you've got this very moralistic attitude. And in science, not in fitness industry dips, we are now recognizing obesity and overweight as a chronically relapsing neurochemical condition. Because the reality, it's hard for me to say this, right? I've spent my career, the majority of my life, 30 some odd years, trying to put out the best information that I could. Because I do believe that part of the reason diet failures happen so often is because the information is so bad. But even with that, that doesn't change the fact that our success rate is incredibly mediocre. Now, it's not the numbers that 95% of diet fail statistic is wrong and bogus, and people need to stop saying it. It's not true. But depending on how you define success, depending on 30 to 60% might lose some amount of weight and keep it off for some period of time. It's okay, but there's huge variety. And I mean, there's a researcher named Stunkard, obesity research in the 50s. And he said the reality of dieting is that the majority of people who try to diet, of that people, some percentage will lose weight and some much smaller percentage will keep a proportion off that in the long term. And 7 decades later, nothing has changed. And nothing's going to change. Sorry, we've tried every lifestyle intervention possible. We've tried every diet, every exercise program. We've gamified it, VR. I don't care what it is. The success rate has not changed, and they're not going to magically start tomorrow. And now we have the GLP-1s, which is this new class of drugs. It's the first truly new tool in the toolbox that has gone beyond previous anti-obesity drugs. And my book has the entire first chapter as a history of that, of all that's come before. They have so far surpassed what earlier drugs have done. The newest drugs, well, it's still in development. It's called retatrutide. It is approaching levels of weight loss at low levels of bariatric surgery, 25% average weight loss. This is shocking, right? And with every new drug, it's getting better. It's showing more frequent results as they develop new compounds. And there is still this, it depends on what group you're talking to. Like one of the reasons, like my Facebook group, there's a lot of GLP-1 questions because I don't take that moralistic approach to it because I keep up with the science, right? And I'd kick people out for pulling that BS. Just try harder. Hey, just get out and I'll just kick them out. Right? Like I'm about using whatever tools are available. And what's hilarious, like in every other field, we will adopt every new tool, right? It'd be like saying, oh, why not just use a slide rule? Stop being lazy. Don't use a calculator. Like it's not quite the same, but we adopt new tools in every other field. And yet in this, we're like, no, just diet and exercise. I'm sorry, it failed. And it will continue to fail. And it will always fail and interestingly, substance abuse treatment is just about the same. They show just about the same statistical rates of success. Although in a way, substance abuse is, I hate to say that it's easier, like to become sober than to lose weight. And in some ways it is, in some ways it isn't. If anybody listening to this that has dealt with addiction or substance abuse will be like, this guy's full of it, but hear me out. The difference is that when you are trying to quit alcohol or drugs, recreational drugs or drugs of abuse, the required intake is 0. Here, you can consume none. And a lot of that is setting up what are called these bright line boundaries. Someone who's dealt with alcohol abuse, misuse, I don't know the current term off the top of my head. They can simply not go into a bar. They can simply not be in environments that where alcohol is available. You got to eat, right? You have
Right.
to consume food. Again, I'm not saying like, and there's differences in the dynamics. Drug addiction, the early stages are the hardest because you're going through withdrawal, you're suffering, you're miserable. It does get relatively easier over time. With weight loss, it's the exact opposite. The early weight loss is easy and then it gets harder over time. So I'm not, again, I don't want people to mishear me, but that is the fundamental difference. You have to eat something.
The
And
decision have to be made every day regardless.
well,
It's not,
yes,
you
yeah,
can't avoid.
right. There is, and we are beset by food triggers, whether it's, every store, every uh, commercials, radio, everything is pushing, and these are acting as food cue triggers. And again, it's a lot of Pavlovian and Skinderian conditioning, the whole separate thing. Can it be done? Yeah, obviously some people do it, but it's a very small percentage. Majority of people can't. And the GLP-1s have truly changed the game because of how they're working mechanistically. And they have offered the first new true progress in the field. And that's the stance I take on it, that for some people, now, just going back to the moralistic idiocy of the fitness industry, because I love this one. These are people that are taking 6 pre-workout supplements. Then you've got the guys taking 12 drugs, 6 anabolic steroids, insulin, GH, IGF-1, and 3 untested peptides. And they're like, oh, weight loss drugs are a crutch. They should just try harder. Well, then why don't you just train harder? Like the line in the sand, because this is what people do. They draw the line in the sand so that they're on the correct side of it.
Of course.
Everybody else is not. I've seen it to ridiculous degrees. I've seen people, anabolic steroid users are like, oh yeah, I take orals, but I don't inject. I'm not one of those dirty needle users. You see
Right.
that in recreational drugs. You're like, oh yeah, I smoke heroin, but I don't inject it. Right? Like it's a human ability to rationalize. And I just look at these people and go, so you're telling me that the 12 drugs you take,
They passed the test.
those are okay, including what, and they're like, oh, the GLP-1s need more research. There's 20 plus years of study. You're taking 6 untested peptides. The line in the sand, the cognitive dissonance, and the only reason they can justify that, because you ask them why, and there's no logical reason, because what they are fundamentally justifying is the fact that deep down, those individuals hate fat people. That's what it comes down to. Moralistically, they and they go, well, if you stop using the drugs, you regain weight. If you stop taking your steroids, you lose your gains. What is the difference? Every single one of us abuses some compound, whether it's caffeine, whether it's anti-inflammatory. We all do it. Right. I'm a Diet Coke and caffeine Coke kind of guy.
Yeah.
Same thing. We justify it, and someone could go, that's unhealthy. Here's data that shows, and we'll go, no, it's okay. But that's bad. Why? Because we're not using it. Ergo, we draw that line in the sand at exactly
And
that.
And I think there's like incentive drives behavior. So if you spend all of your time being the fit person saying you need to be like me, you need to work harder, then you kind of have just created that identity and that image, and anyone who's not meeting it, you can use it against them too.
Well, they're also fitness people, especially bodybuilders, are just a bunch of judgmental, narcissistic pricks by and large. If you're not in shape, if you're not a bodybuilder, if you're a power lifter, you're fat. If you're an Olympic lifter, you're not in shape. Bodybuilders see, this is true of all sports, but whatever. We're all the hero in our own story. But the hip, and again, don't mishear me. I did a podcast with a buddy. Like, I'm not saying GLP-1s are better or worse than anabolic. I'm not. It's the hypocrisy that bothers me. The fact that the arguments they use apply just as much to the compounds that sometimes even more. I know a coach. I like the guy a lot. He's a good friend of mine, and he just got a copy of my book because hopefully it'll get it. And he goes, oh yeah. I don't like the GLP-1s for contest bodybuilders. I don't want to add to their drug load. Oh, the 12 things you've already got them on are okay, but this is just a step too far. Jesus Christ. Like, you have got to be kidding me. And it's just, they may not even be aware of it, but deep down, that, like, we're generally not aware of those unconscious urges. How we express them linguistically is a way to justify them deep down. And deep down, it just comes to, somebody did a YouTube thing. And of course, they didn't ask me to be on it because I might say something, coherent. And it was, they had people that were overweight and they had people in the fitness industry. Is obesity a choice? And literally one of the guys on there was like, when I see a fat person, it makes me sick. And
Yeah.
we wonder that the fitness industry is failing. You know, how can you expect anybody to want to be part of this subculture when they run into or gym fail stuff or gross BS
I was
stuff like
going to
that?
say that. There's also the like, hey, just go to the gym. It's your first day. Have a good time. It's like, well, someone's recording you potentially and trying to embarrass you. Oh.
The fitness industry. Don't worry, when you come to the gym, we don't judge you. Also, the fitness industry. Hey, here's a gym fail video of someone I videoed. You know, there was some very famous fitness girl that videoed someone in her locker room, another girl that was overweight, and put it up on her Instagram. Was like, seeing this just makes me sick. Like, you judgmental. I won't curse on this podcast, but you know what I want to say. And we wonder that we're failing, right? Because you can't have it both ways. It can be an extremely, and then people, just as a side note, they're like, screw Planet Fitness and their lunk alarm and no bodybuilders. I'm like, you know what? Planet Fitness has gotten more people into the gym than any of your self-important, narcissistic posturing, because you know what? They kept you people out, the bodybuilding, right? Look, I like hardcore gyms. I've trained my whole life, but you know what? I don't want to be around these grunting, weight dropping macho pinheads either. Planet Fitness because they made it a place where people that just wanted to, well, you can't squat or deadlift. Who cares? The average person doesn't need to do those movements anyway. What is it? Well, it's not for you. Well, I can't train there. You got other gyms. People are like, I go to Planet Fitness and deliberately drop weights. Why are you people such assholes? Why? What is this? How does it impact you that Planet Fitness is giving people a place to work out when you have the only argument I've ever heard against Planet Fitness was valid. Someone in a small town in Planet Fitness moved in and their hardcore gym closed. I agree with that. But in every other case, you've got gyms to go be a pinhead at. Planet Fitness is not for you. You don't have to like the movies that everybody else likes any more than they have to like your stuff. What does this accomplish other than you making things worse by showing the fact that you are as much of an asshole as the general population thinks you are? Like, what does this achieve? Okay, so back to the GLP-1. But yeah, I don't take that moralistic attitude. It's a tool, and it's a critical tool. And it is a tool that has achieved more than the entire weight loss industry has achieved in centuries, in decades, period. The success rates, the effects, the benefits are massive. And the reason that led me to write my book was that the misinformation on both sides of the aisle, both with people thinking that the drugs are a level of magic that they're really not, versus the scare tactic histrionic articles that were making them seem like, death in a needle, all needed to be corrected. On top of which, and again, I will agree with some of the criticisms, but it's not of the drugs that is in their application. Because other ones, people go, well, people just use these drugs without changing their lifestyle. People use steroids without working out. What's the damn difference, right? Like, what's the difference? It's okay for a student to use Adderall to study. That's not a crutch. Sure, okay, but helping someone, whatever. I'll stop beating that soapbox. So part of the other part of the problem. So that was the fundamental issue, was like, okay, someone needs to look at all the actual science and set the record straight in terms of what the drugs do, what they don't do, what the true side effect profile is, what's going on physiologically. And that's the first 8 chapters of the book. It's just the science. And I had to, like the way I do, pulled every paper that has been written. It was including, I spent a month trying to track down this minor mechanism of no real practical relevance, but I just wanted to know. And the answer came down to, we don't know. Nobody in my group actually does clinical research on what I was trying to find the answer to. And he just said, yeah, we don't know. But I still spent a month trying, reading a bunch of papers that gave me a headache, because that's just the way my brain works. But then the next 19 chapters were application, because one of the problems, and this has always been a problem with obesity treatment, with obesity drugs, right? Because obesity treatment, they want a drug that just does the heavy lifting, so to speak, that works without the person. And fine, I don't necessarily, of course, I don't agree with that, but that's what obesity treatment wants. But people were being given these compounds, and as often as not, they were given exactly zero information on what to do with their eating, activity. Now, in the studies, actually, and this was something I got wrong, I was unaware until I read all the studies. In the majority of the studies, they actually give a lifestyle intervention. It's a stupid lifestyle intervention, but it's at least information. But in the real world, especially with the telemedicine and compounding, but even among physicians who don't have a background in it, people get their prescription and they're given their drug and said, go with God. I had some people in my group send me like what information they'd been given, and occasionally it was really good. And one of them was a handout. It was like, eat healthy, get enough sleep, brush your teeth. I'm like, not bad advice. However, not really useful. So I wanted to address, like, because a lot of these supposed side effects with, the lean body mass loss, which is a big misunderstanding that I would like to touch on because the industry, including clinical researchers, get this wrong constantly. A lot of the things came down to the fact that the diet, nutritional information, nutritional intakes weren't good. Because what you saw happening, or what I think was happening to a lot of people, take the average person, not the fitness people, not that people that these drugs are really meant for. And they have, at best, a mediocre diet. And I'm probably being somewhat polite, but you know what I mean. You now give them an appetite suppressant because it's most, if not exclusively, what these drugs do. Well, now they're just eating a low calorie, mediocre diet, right? If they're not making, and as calories come down, you have to change what you're eating. Specifically, you got to get a protein in. And if you've got Gen Pop that's eating maybe 50 grams of protein per day to begin with, and you cut their appetite by 25 to 45%, now they're eating 30 grams of protein. And of course, bad things happen, but it's not the drug per se. It's the lack of information. And I wanted to address exercise and the fact there's huge weight loss variability that is not discussed. I needed to talk about how to ameliorate side effects. I mean, there's a chapter on how to use the drugs, how to inject, where to inject, split dosing, escalations, things that just aren't out there. It's in the literature, but it hasn't trickled down to public use. Talk about plateaus, how to break them, and then, of course, long-term maintenance. Because that's the other place. You're like, well, when you go off, you just regain the weight. Well, if you stop training, your muscles go away. If you stop the diet, the weight comes back. What's the difference? Like, it's a non-discriminatory criticism because it applies to anything, right?
Yeah.
If you stop going to work, you stop making money. Like, I don't know what the difference is, but it also points to the fact that if you have a chronically relapsing condition, you just don't come off.
That's life.
Right? For some people. Now, like, again, I will draw back on my own. If you have a mental health issue that is neurochemical, you don't ever get to come off, right? Like, I'm on bipolar meds until there's a cure. Maybe some of the ketamine, psilocybin stuff, like maybe some of that will work as a cure, like maybe. But at this point, all you can do is treat. You cannot cure. And that's true. Diet is just a treatment. And if you stop the treatment, you regain the weight. There is no difference. So in a chronically relapsing condition, well, that requires chronic treatment. Chronic, it's right there in the name. And for some people, that may mean lifetime use. Now, I address there's a whole chapter on that. The final chapter of the book. Well, there's also a special appendix, but that's a whole second thing. And the final chapter of the book is like, look, there are ways that you can at least attempt to reduce your dose. Some people can come off completely. Some people come off completely and then use them intermittently rather than being on constantly. But there will be a population of people that realistically will have to be on forever. And that's fine. And I want to really make the point. That doesn't mean that they're better or worse or lesser or greater than anybody else. That is their individual neurochemistry. And it is what it is until we get longer acting drugs, until we find a way to, somehow reprogram the system. That if that happens in my lifetime, I'll be shocked, but who knows? Like, there's no telling what the next, like, you would have to fundamentally rewire the system to get it to start working normally. But it's just, so yeah, but so that's kind of where we're at.
Okay.
Is, well, yeah, in the studies, they'll have them lose weight and they take them off the drug and yeah, everybody rebounds, but they take them off immediately. Many are using the drugs instead of lifestyle changes. And I don't advocate that. Are people going to do it? Sure, but that's got nothing to do with me,
Mhm.
right? If that's people are going to do that with anything. People take weight loss pills, they take muscle building supplements, all that crap,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
they don't work out. So what's the difference? And the answer is there isn't any. Um, so But what research right at the end of the year, like I happened to kind of write this at the right time because the data that I needed just came out before I got exhausted and was like, it's done. If I don't know if anybody that's ever written a book or is writing a book, especially this one, because every week there was new data. And I'm like, I'm not going to keep going back and updating this weekly because it'll never get done. At some point, every book has to be done. I'm just like, that's it. Nothing new. I got it covered. But some data came out right at the end of 2024 where when people, rather than going off cold turkey, when they tapered the dose down gradually while they intensified their lifestyle, they were able to maintain better. It's when you stop immediately and all the body's counter, there was other suggestions. Maybe people come off and use one of the earlier appetite suppressants to maintain in the long term, right? So I addressed all these strategies, but again, for some people, lifetime use may just be the reality of the game. So that one is just another. Yeah, so that's kind of where we stand in sort of general sense.
Okay. So now what I want to do is I'm going to throw out some quotes you've said in the past. Give me your first take on it, and it doesn't have to be long, but you can go at your Lyle speed there. So the first one here is, I'm angry about this because I love it so much, and I want everyone to get good advice and hit their goal. I'm angry because people are lying to other people.
Yeah, well, I've been in the fitness industry for 30 years, and my goal the entire time has been to give the best information that I think is available. Because people are like, oh, Lyle hates the fitness industry and he thinks that this and that. And you're like, no, you don't get it. I love it. I love it. I wouldn't have dedicated my life to this and dealt with all the BS I've dealt with for 3 solid decades if I didn't love this. I can make so much more money doing what these scumbags do. What makes me so angry is that we have a bunch of drug users who don't know jack crap giving advice to naturals and lying about their drug use. We've got all these people that are doing stuff, selling lies and garbage and the same misinformation for no other reason to make money. That's what makes me angry. I've spent my entire career trying to fight the tide of absolute BS that does nothing but keep people confused. It does nothing but keep people from getting to the result because people do it because they need to do an Instagram post every day. And every study contradicts every other study. I'm saying the same basic stuff since 2002 because yes, I am angry, but I'm not angry at the industry. I'm angry. I'm not angry. I'm angry at the people in the industry. And again, I don't want to generalize. There are good people in the industry, but they're not the ones we hear about. They're not the ones with a 3 million user base on YouTube where someone wakes up every morning and is like, huh, what lie can I tell the people today? Oh, I've got it. Sleep is more powerful than steroids, right? Like that is the nature. And the industry's always been like this. It's just worse now because of the nature of social media. That makes me, and then somehow I'm the bad guy for being critical of these people. Why? Because I'm trying to criticize bad advice. Why am I the bad guy? Other than the fact that you don't like the fact that they're wrong and I'm right. And once you religiously attach yourself to a leader, the cognitive dissonance makes me the bad guy for pointing out the fact that you backed the wrong horse. So yeah, I'm furious about it. I have been, but thankfully, anger is what fuels it.
Our next one here is, if you are anything like the normal trainee, you're doing too much. You probably train too many days per week and take too few days off. You're trying to lift 4 days a week and trying to do cardio another 3, 4 days a week.
Yeah, that's in sports. Always the problem has been people that get into something look at the top performers. Well, Lance Armstrong trains 30 hours a week. I'm going to ride a bike. I'm going to start by training 30 hours a week. Right. He started at 3 hours a week. Ronnie Coleman did not start training the way he trained. Not to mention that pursuing elite sport, the level of training you have to put in is enormous and the return on investment is absolutely microscopic, right? 2 days of training gives you 80% of the results of 3. From a time investment is tripling your workout time to get 20% more worth it. For the average person, all this nonsense of 52 sets and 48 sets. And they're like, yeah, so they did triple the volume and spent twice as long in the gym to get 2% maybe improvement over 8 weeks, but it was only the one muscle group. And yeah, the average person, are you an elite athlete? Does that extra 1%, is that going to make the difference? Not to mention that when you're broken after 12 weeks and don't train for the rest of the year, right? Like the reality is that time is the largest roadblock to regular exercise that people will list. But people are like, oh, more is better. And again, there is a certain individual in the industry is like, yeah, naturals should train more than the pros. He woke up that morning and decided that was the lie he was going to tell. Right. And he's like, you looked at Dorian Yates training. Dorian trained for, yeah, I don't think that's very much. Yeah, Dorian only won 6 Olympias. Imagine how many he might have won if he trained twice as much. The average person is trying to out-train many of the best guys. And even if they aren't, the best guys are seeking that final 1% because they're elite competitors. I'm sorry, for the average person, most of your gain, the grand majority, are going to come from it's the Pareto principle applied to training.
Yeah.
Right? Your initial investment gets you 80 to 90% of your results. Every doubling gets you exponentially less. You're an elite competitor, it matters. But yeah, and then what happens, it's like with dieting. They're like, I'm going to train 7 days a week. And they do that for three weeks, and then they get burned out or they get injured. And then they don't train for the next 48. Which fundamentally, long-term consistency. See the same thing when people set up some 6-day per week training program. And I'm like, what happens when life gets in the way? Unless you're an unemployed college kid or independently wealthy, life will get in the way. I would rather someone target 3 to 4 days a week in the weight room and consistently get that than target 6 and only get 4 most of the time because they keep missing workouts because of life. But people always think more is better. And at the fundamentals, like if someone wanted the most minimal training program, just for basic fitness, I'm not talking about bodybuilding, I'm not jacking this. I'm talking about just general health and fitness. 2 full body workouts a week in the weight room and 3 days of cardio will give you the grand majority of gains you're going to.
Yeah.
Adding to that, like I said, if your goal is to get, somewhat jacked, fine. The average person is never going to get past suck, to put it in powerlifting terms, right? They might get from suck to good, but they look at the genetic elite who are the top 1% who do this stuff. Although when you look at their early training, they didn't do this. This is what they do now. Or this is what they say they do for social media to sell ebooks, right? This is not how they train during the majority they train just like everybody else. But you can't say that and stay relevant in social media these days. Yeah, I do think most people, again, it's very goal dependent. Someone's a power lifter. Yeah, 4 days a week is probably required. How many people are competitive power lifters that are listening to this in the general training? I go into my gym and I see people that are never going to compete, and they're in there 6 days a week for 2 hours a day. I'm like, why? What are you achieving other than feeding, an unhealthy addiction to a stupid subculture? Subculture I happen to love, but it's still dumb.
The next one is they are a genetic limit. No one can run the 100 meters in 0 seconds. Somewhere from now and then, there's going to be a point where no one can get to.
Yeah, that was one from years ago because I get into arguments with people and they're like, there's no genetic limit. It's more of it's an argumentum ad extremum. It's an extreme example to make a point. To go, by definition, you cannot run it in 0. So somewhere between now and there will be a point that nobody can get across, or that the improvements will be so microscopic as to be irrelevant. Apparently people in the fitness industry don't know what an asymptote is. Because they'll go, no. You never actually get, to you're never quite there. That next sprinter might go 0.01 second faster than Usain Bolt. It might take him 30 years. There's no genetic limit. I go, fine. This is pedantic semantics, but in a practical sense, yeah, it is. I mean, you can go to any natural bodybuilding show and naturals are no bigger than they ever were 20 years ago. There are more outliers. There are more, because there's more people in the sport. But I mean, look at the facts. Usain Bolt ran 9.59. How long was that? A decade ago? It's longer than that, right? In the last 10 years, despite all of these training advancements, despite all these amazing things, nobody has gotten close, right? If you look at sports, most world records in most well-established sports have been stagnant since the 80s. Occasionally we're seeing occasional records, but most of that's technology, right? In running, we've got the new super shoes. These are springs, right? Yeah, people are running fast. Swimming, we had the swimsuits that until they banned them, everybody went 10% faster. And ice speed skating, when they developed the clap skate, and now the world records are completely stagnant. Swimming, you do see it because we still don't know how people swim, even after a century, because swimming is a really, really weird sport. In new sports, you see rapid changes.
Of course. Yeah.
In most sports, if anything, people are worse now than they were 10 or 20 years ago because the drug testing is better. Right? There were records set by the Germans in the 80s that still stand because you can't drug female athletes to the level that the GDR did. But by and large, so of course there's a limit. And yeah, fine, it'll take the next, even, they tried to get the one guy to run the sub 2 hour marathon. They put him on the perfect course with super shoes, and they had a car breaking the wind for him. Okay, great, but is this really, can we compare this to and he still didn't do it, right? Any of these changes in all sports are mainly due to technology. Human physiology, VO2 max can't get any higher. None of this can get any higher, but just at a fundamental level, there must be a limit to improvements because again, like I said, that was just an example to make a point. But it's true of all sports. There is just a limit to how, at some point, there is a limit that in a reality sense can't be reached. Somewhere between those two.
For sure. So this next one is kind of a fun question. So you recently had a long podcast with Solomon Nelson
Uh-huh.
discussing Dr. Mike, and it's well documented. So what's your Mount Rushmore, the 4 people in this field that make you roll your eyes, and why?
Oh God, can I even limit it to 4? Well, Mike for sure, because he is unfortunately developed an extremely large following and simply lies to people relentlessly. He changes his argument every week. He pretends to be an exercise scientist. In response to my criticism of him, his responses were F you, he threatened to assault me, and then he did an hour of character defamation and told bold-faced lies about me on a podcast that has now been deleted with a lifting dermatologist because the cowards in this industry won't stand by their words. Because people are like, why do you hate him? Like, A, I don't hate anybody. But if you're going to pretend to be a scientist, be a scientist. Don't play both sides against the middle and be a bro when you're wrong. So he's number 1. We've, of course, got Brad Schoenfeld, who humorously, I remember when he was coming up. I was around before all of these people. Like I said, I was here first. When he and most of the evidence-based group started, they were fighting the good fight. They wanted to bring science to a field that was infested with BS. And then they became what they used to criticize. They became bro gurus. Brad will block anyone who questions him. I had the goal to criticize his volume study, a study he never even believed in. Read Max Muscle 2.0. He never mentions 45 sets. He cites his own study, but he mentions 10 to 20 sets. He didn't believe in it. His cronies didn't believe in it, but they had to defend him because big mean Mr. Lyle was critical of his paper. And his rebuttals to my criticism was the lamest ass BS you've ever heard. If anyone else had made that kind of rebuttal to his criticism, he would have excoriated them. He is a gross hypocrite. I pointed out, the assessor was not blinded. And he goes, I'm not biased. Oh my God, are you kidding me? We're all biased. And anyone says they're not biased is lying to themselves. And they go, that's not even the point. The point is that in science, not blinding the assessor is a source of bias. Brad doesn't think the rules. Now, he'll criticize other papers that don't blind. He's been on position papers that said they need to blind the assessor. The rules don't apply to him. So he's another one. Menno Henselman, who, as a physiologist, is a mediocre statistician. He misrepresents every study that he puts on his page. Because if you go read what the paper said, he says. Sorry, what he says the paper says and what it actually says is never the same. They all do that to one degree or another, but he's another really egregious example. And then finally, probably, not to give the guy any more credit than he deserves, but, we've got the up and coming Dr. Milo Wolf, who is better at social media than at his craft, who spent a year promoting nothing but length and partials. Every video he did was length and partials. And then a paper came out showing that partial ROM leg pressing was just as good as full range. And he completely flip-flopped. You don't need full ROM. You don't need full ROM to get big. Like, the industry is a joke. Because again, when you have to do daily social media posts, you have to jump on every new paper. That's not how science works. When you build a scientific model, you look at all the research. You don't just look, you don't go paper by paper by paper. So he's the other one. He also, I do want to go back to the GLP-1 thing one last time, because this is the big one that people get wrong, both in this field and also in clinical practice. There's this big issue with the GLP-1 drugs causing lean body mass loss of varying degrees. Now, we talk about body composition. We have two components. We have fat mass, which is all your body fat, and then we have everything else: bone, muscle, water, connective tissue, minerals, organs, everything else, lean body mass or fat-free mass. I like lean body mass. There's a tiny technical difference, but it doesn't matter. So what the studies are seeing is lean body mass loss. Now, lean body mass is not synonymous with muscle. Skeletal muscle is maybe 40 to 45% of your total lean body mass, maybe up to 50 in elite athletes. The other is everything else. On any diet, you will lose lean body mass, water, glycogen. If you take a big poo, that will show up as lean body mass loss. Underappreciated fact: a portion of fat cells is lean body mass. When you lose fat, your lean body mass goes down a little bit, right? So they were seeing lean body mass loss with the GLP-1s of varying degrees. And that got stated in the industry as the GLP-1s are causing 30% muscle loss. No. They may be causing 30% lean body mass loss. Those are not synonyms. The actual muscle loss is very, very, very much smaller. And I've heard people, clinicians, physicians, say that, oh, GLP-1s eat muscle. Well, number one, no, they don't. If there's a problem, it's because people aren't getting enough protein and they're not resistance training. It's nothing to do with the GLP-1s just create a deficit. They're just appetite suppressants. They put you on a chemically induced diet and control your hunger. Because if you look at the dieting literature over the last however many decades, about 25% of the total weight loss is lean body mass. Well, the most recent review of GLP-1s found that about 28% of weight loss with GLP-1s was lean body mass. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but 25 and 28 are pretty close, right? It's not causing any more lean body mass loss than your typical diet, and it's not skeletal muscle. The little Milo Wolf, among many others, doesn't understand the difference between lean body mass and muscle mass. And for someone who makes a big deal about his PhD, that's some kindergarten level ignorance. There's actually a paper someone wrote, and it was called Fundamental Body Composition Principles for GLP-1s. Basically, they're like, you people are so dumb about that. We got to write a whole paper explaining kindergarten level body composition concepts so you people will stop screwing it up. The little Milo Wolf, the newest guru, the one that they're holding up as the new great sports scientist, doesn't understand a kindergarten level concept. So he'd be number 4.
So you mentioned that like Brad, for example, used to fight the good fight. So like
they all did.
Like what story there is? Do you think it's about money, clout, social proof, being next?
I don't.
Where do things go wrong?
I don't know, because they all did. We had Brad, Krieger, Brett Contreras, who, fun fact, Brett Contreras' PhD is a joke, but Brett Contreras' PhD advisor was Brad. It's one gigantic circle jerk. They all started out promoting the good fight. And I don't know. I don't know if they bought into their own hype. I don't know if they realized there was more money in being a guru. I don't know if they're simply so insecure that they can't handle the same criticism that they throw against others. I don't actually know what happened.
And what if
But
social media lead people in that direction too, or if it's more
it,
inherent than that? That's
it,
something like
I don't think social media helps because once you start to get a following, what happens is to be a guru, you can never be wrong. Lane Norton's another one like that. Lane Norton started as the anti-guru guru. He was take until metabolic damage came out. And when I criticized it, he used every guru tactic in the book. You don't do science. I'm bigger than you. You made my wife cry. To which I asked, Lane, did your wife cry more when you cheated on her while she was pregnant? Right? These are not scientific rebuttals. But he was so in the wrong. He had no data because all these people, for all the crap they talk about me, somehow in 30 some odd years, I've made valid scientific criticism. I have yet to get valid scientific rebuttals. Because if these people thought I was so wrong, if they're so much smarter than me, if they're so much better than me, why can't they defend the science? Because they care about the science till the science says they're wrong, which is usually when I get involved. It's excuses. It's pathetic dismissals. It's Mike Israetel saying, F you, I benched more than you in high school. Now, I haven't read the paper that says the correlation between high school bench press ability and knowledge, but I don't think that that's a PhD level response. I don't think Brad blocking anyone on his social media because they ask him a question he can't answer. Now, fine, I'm easy. Lyle's a rude asshole and he cusses. Yeah, that's fine. I know plenty of people that have asked him completely polite questions. When he can't address them, he blocks them because the easiest way to always be right is to make sure nobody ever sees the criticism. And social media very much allowed. So I don't know. Maybe they realize there's more money being a guru. Being a guru, this bodybuilding as a field tends to attract a lot of narcissists. The narcissists can't admit they're ranging from subclinical to diagnosable. And when you're a narcissist, you can't ever, and when you're a guru, you can't ever admit to being wrong. Because I will admit when I've been like I did it earlier. My ideas from 2004. Now, was I wrong in 2004? No, I'm good at what I do, but I cannot predict the future. Not well. I mean, I can't predict what the new, I'm pretty good at knowing like, okay, I suspect this is where the research was, but I was wrong about that. And I'm willing to say now I would not suggest that. If I were a guru, I would keep holding to those ideas despite the fact that the data is wrong. The data says I'm wrong. Okay. But people that are, well, I'm not going to say that because it sounds very, very selective. There's a group of people that like the fact that I can admit when I'm wrong. Well, sometimes. Look, we all want to be right. I've had people tell me that, Lyle, you just want to be right. We all want to be right. And that person's never admitting they're wrong, right? The same argument applies. I go, if you think I'm wrong, prove me wrong. When I did the failures thing, I said, if you think I'm wrong about bar speed, send me a video of you doing an all-out set. Prove me wrong. Nope, I got exactly 0. They knew I was right, but instead they just attacked me personally. If you think, I will always lay out exactly. If you think I'm wrong, do this. Send me the video, and I will put it on my YouTube, admit I was wrong. And I never get a response. Mike Israel had 7 years to do a single all-out set to prove me wrong. And he spent that entire time talking in circles and saying he wants to strangle me. If you thought I was wrong, he'd prove it. It's really that easy. If I say I can prove you wrong, I'll do it because it's faster for me to prove someone wrong than to make the pathetic excuses this field makes. So if these people are such scientists, they should be able to rebut my science. They can't. It's pathetic excuses, personal attacks, it's dismissals, threats of violence. I ask them, probably money, what I was going to say is the fact that I admitted I was wrong, rather than people acknowledging that that's what an adult does, they weaponize it against me. Oh, well, Lyle's been wrong before. Maybe he's wrong now, right? If you say you're wrong for people that have already decided they don't like me, and that's what it is. That's all that it is. Once you attach yourself to someone, once you are a follower of Schoenfeld or Israel or whatever, you will do everything in your power to make them right and the person you don't like wrong. The evidence doesn't matter. I put up 30 videos showing what happens with bar speed when failure occurs. And people thought F you Lyle was a rebuttal to that. You can't fix stupid. You can't. Anybody and then of course, 4 or 5 years later, this happened with Brad volume study. All the people that defended him, I started getting the occasional PM that, well, you know what? I think you were right. And I said, well, yeah, of course I was. because I don't have an emotional attachment to it. I don't care who it is. I don't care if it's someone I've been friends with for 20 years. If I think they're wrong, I'll say it, period. And I can still like them. Mention this coach. I like him a lot as a person. I think his opinions on GLP-1s are moronic. Got nothing to do with my friendship, but that's not how most people think. So was there more money? So they liked people, blowing smoke up their butt, telling them how great they are as they basically recreate what I've been saying for 20 years. The big discovery last year, I want to say, is James Clear was like, wow, it's really impressive just how little training volume you need to maintain. I've been saying that since 2002. Have any of them ever given me credit? Of course not. All the stuff I was saying about protein digestion speeds and the dumbass idea of multiple protein synthesis per meal, the Tromelin paper came out, and I wrote a really smug video, and I was like, it's exhausting being right all the time. I'm like, I've been saying this for 20 years, but everyone's like, see, it doesn't, you're going to see a ton of, I go, I've been saying this since 2002. Even with flexible eating, there was someone in the early 2010s literally plagiarized my entire book, claimed that they had pioneered flexible eating. I guarantee they made more. They also lied about being an RD, which is very illegal. But whatever, my fight over that is what got the women's book out. So I guess in the big picture, it helped. But that's just, I don't know. It's the nature of the industry. And I do think social media, because it's very easy to create an echo chamber. Now, people will say the same thing. Oh, you kick people out of your group. Yeah, but not for criticizing my evidence or my science. If you ask me a question about one of my claims, I will show you the human clinical research that backs it. I will back people out for I'll kick people out for being assholes. If during a debate, you start making personal attacks, whether to me or my lifter, or just, yeah, I'll absolutely kick you out. But not because you asked me a question or there's lots of people I disagree with who are in my group, because their disagreements, they can show me their science and I can tell them why I think my science is better. And we can have good disagreements and discussions. I don't kick them out. The other guys always do. Go ask Brad the most politely phrased, innocuous question about something he claims, and you'll be gone.
Interesting.
And they all do it. They all do it, right? When I criticized Brad's paper, he just blocked me and left the group. But at the same time, if they ask someone a question, Brad will ask another scientist a question. If he doesn't get a response, he's like, crickets, you hypocritical D-bag.
Interesting.
So
wait a minute. It's like 20 years from now. What do you hope that we will have learned about training by then? That
Nothing.
we don't now?
Nothing ever changes. Nothing will ever change in the majority, because the noise will always outweigh the evidence. I actually, years and years and years ago, there was an ISSN sports nutrition conference here in Austin. This was early days before I, pissed off the entire circle jerk. And it's weird, throughout my career, there's been different circle jerks. There was one in the 2000s. They all didn't like me because I criticized their evidence. So they all, I've always been on the outside, and that's fine. I'm perfectly content being the most hated man in the industry, because I'm not here to be liked. I'm here to be right. And I know that sounds smug and egotistical, but my track record shows I'm not basing this on a claim that I'm right. My track record shows that that's generally true. And so we went down to say hello, and Brad was like, I really think evidence-based training is increasing. And I went, you're out of your mind. I go, in the tiny group you live in, it appears to be. I go, maybe by degrees, maybe there's 10% of people. I go, bodybuilding.com, T-Nation, they get more page views in one day than you get in 6 months. I go, the noise will always outweigh the fact. And that's never, ever going to change. If anything, it's going to get worse, right? There's that meme floating around. We thought that a lack of information was the problem, but the internet proved that that was not true.
For sure.
Because the problem is not, yes, the internet is full of all the information known to God and man. And when it comes to weight loss and training, most of that information is bad. And while it's very easy for the evidence-based people to get really smug about it, and I've taken them to task for this, really, do your own research. Really? Okay, number one, your job is to educate. But number two, go search weight loss on the internet. The first 10 pages will be filled with the worst BS you've ever seen, because they've got great SEO, right? Because they've got great marketing. Mike Isertel's got 3 million people because the guy running RP had great marketing, but the information is trash, which is why Solomon and I did a 47-hour video directly addressing his claims, right? And people got in our crap about that. Why do you hate the fitness industry? As someone else, I won't get into this whole drama, was just like, oh, why do you guys hate the fit? And I emailed them. Well, I emailed them multiple times because that's what I do. And I said, if you were in a field and your goal was to educate people and you saw someone deliberately misleading people, would it not be your responsibility to address that? How can you say that trying to correct misinformation means you hate an industry? How can you possibly think that? But the problem is that fitness, more so than any other field, training and nutrition, it is unique. Maybe psychology is the only other one. Okay. If you want to look how to code in C++, for example, there's only so many things that work. There are probably relatively, I'm not a programmer guy, I programmed in BASIC. There are relatively more or less efficient ways of programming a certain subroutine, but you don't have 10,000 different ways to do it. If you are an auto mechanic, there are not 10,000 ways to fix a car because 9,999 of them don't work. In engineering, there are only so many ways to build a plane wing because with all the rest, it falls out of the sky, right? If you go look at that, if you want, I'll give you a 2-minute rant on AI because you mentioned it, because people don't like my take on it. But I'll come back to that in a second. In certain fields where there is not a lot of debate, where there is not endless variation, you can get good information. If I Google how often do I need to change the oil in my car, I may get a couple different opinions, whether it's 3,000 or 7,000 miles, but I'm not going to get numbers ranging from 1 to 10,000, right? Days. In training, that's not the case. No matter how stupid an idea is, no matter how stupid a training approach is, no matter how stupid a diet is, it seems like everything works. And most of the information is bad because people have something to sell. And when you get into the issue of genetics, people that have never been, they're like, oh, well, I eat like this. And you were always skinny. Show me the before and afters. Show me how this worked. Show me this nutritionally adequate. In training, especially when you've got lots of people on drugs, because drugs make the training not matter. Now, I will be the first one to admit, again, I'm not a drug guy, but the type of training you should do when you're on steroids probably should be different than what naturals do. Mike made it a big issue. Love's criticizing my training. No, I'm not. I'm criticizing your information. And that should be very clear. Either he's truly illiterate and ignorant as hell, or he's lying, and it's the latter. If he couldn't address my actual criticism of information, he had to make it about something else. They all do it. So I'm like, no. What works? Drugs will make you grow without training. And that's fine. And you can train, you can pump and do high reps and low volume and high frequency and low. It doesn't matter because the drugs will make up for it. That doesn't work for natural. So you've got that issue too in the training. It's getting worse, right? Back in the day, we go back to the early 90s. And again, this sounds smug and elitist, and it probably is a little bit. It was very difficult to get online. You had to be able to basically program your modem with TCP and IP, and you had to understand all that stuff. This, in a very way, limited who could get on. It all went wrong with web TV because Walmart, somebody came out with a little device that you plugged into your TV and plugged into your phone socket, and anyone could get online. And again, I'm not, like I said, that sounds way more smug and elitist than it's supposed to be. I'm not saying the internet should only be for certain I'm not. I'm truly, truly not. But that allowed the noise to grow exponentially. Now we had listserv, we had Usenet. Oh man, I had tons of flame wars on Usenet. We had listservs, which were typically moderated. That made it a little bit. Then we had forums, which were moderated. Then we had social media. But now, literally anybody, when the entire barrier to entry in the fitness industry is having a good butt if you're female and big arms if you're a dude, the amount of misinformation and confusing stuff, it is increasing exponentially. And as the internet gets bigger, it will only get worse. So 20 years from now, hopefully I'll be out of this. God almighty, if I'm still dealing with this in my 70s, I have made horrible life choices.
Hey, sorry to interrupt.
No problem. So yeah, that's where I see now Well, a couple things. And this is I've written some ranty pieces, about all the things that seem to work. Because people will be like, "Oh, I read this article and this guy does some slightly different." When you focus on the generalities of training and nutrition, you find that systems that work or approaches that work are more common than not. The details are individually context specific, but that doesn't change the fact that you have people with very big followings going, "Oh yeah, calories don't matter. It's just insulin." That and then you look at the diet that they put people on, and it just magically makes people eat less, right? Stuff like that, and then till people stop eating less, and then again, the GLP-1s are causing the same thing. I know I keep coming back to that book because I'm trying to do press for the damn thing, right? People are like, "Well, I stopped losing weight." GLP-1s, I'm like, yes, because the deficit still matters, right? The diet, the drug creates the deficit, but eventually your body will adapt and energy expenditure. Eventually, you're going to have to start counting calories. Like, I'm all for anything, diet or otherwise. If you can cause weight and fat loss without the person having to be super fixated on food, I'm all for it, whether it's keto or low fat, or I don't care. A lot of those things work because they make people automatically eat less until they don't. And the problem when you tell people, "Oh, calories don't matter," is when they hit a plateau and you go, "Calories matter." They go, "No, no, no. I need to eat more fat if it's on keto. I need to do a fat fast. I need to eat more fat." More fat means more fat burning. It's like, no, you need to be in a deficit and you're not in one. Once you program people with those thought processes, it's very difficult to get them past that. But if you look at all fat loss diets that work, and I make this point, I go, look, everyone that's ever lost fat effectively created a sustained deficit, and everyone that didn't. There you go. There's your answer. There's no other debate about that in the real world. Every natural, if you look at naturals, natural bodybuilding trend, every big natural bodybuilder is strong. Now, they may not be elite powerlifter strong, but more importantly, they got stronger over their career. You will not see a big natural squatting 135. You won't. They might not be squatting 800, but there's also the fact that a lot of high level bodybuilders compete in powerlifting, and there's maybe a lesson there. Now, with drug users, the commonality is the drugs. Any type of training you do, it doesn't really matter beyond what you enjoy doing and what you think will impress people on social media. But the information will just keep getting worse because it's what, again, when the barrier for entry is being in shape and being fit, you can say whatever crap you want. And especially if it's to sell a book. There's another individual, big YouTube following, and make no mistake, his information is not as terrible as the others. But somehow his training changes every month. It's working really well for me. You haven't gained an ounce of muscle in 10 years. Stop lying. But it's every time there's a new fad and he needs to sell a new ebook. When high frequency was a fad, suddenly high frequency training was what, but that's not how you got big, right? Every single one of these guys gained whatever size they got training completely traditionally. But saying that over and over and over again doesn't make you rich. When you have to make a YouTube video 2 or 3 times a week, what is there to say? Not a hell of a lot. That's why I stopped updating my website. I got nothing more to say. I don't.
Yeah, I think that's the challenge there is the incentive to provide reasonable information is almost not there because the more extreme you are on any topic, the more attention you're going to get, the
That
more
too.
you're going to get. And
No,
then,
absolutely.
and then how people justify it is, well, I'm still giving better information than this group of people. So even though I'm doing these
Yeah.
tactics, at least I'm not people. So then they've created another group then they're
Yeah.
better.
Somebody in my group tried to defend Mike Israel. Well, he's not as bad as the rest. That's not a defense of his information. Look at his actual, like, I don't give it. And yes, he is, but that's still not an argument that he's not as well. This guy's he's only murdered 3 people. He's not a serial killer. I mean, he's not nearly as bad. There is a contest guru who has literally said, "I've only killed 4 people." That's not a joke because because his diuretic protocols are stupid. He still has a huge following because the people that don't die get into shape. I kid you not. You cannot fix this. And as much as I try, something I realized when I was younger and have probably forgotten in the modern year is you can only help people that want help. You can't. Now, there's probably 3 major groups. There's the groups that you can't help. young guys that are going to be like, well, Mike Israel's bigger than you. I'm going to listen to him. Cool. Come to me, come back to me after you've wasted 5 years of your life. And you can realize I was right after the fact. And you can realize that he deliberately lied to you for 5 years because he couldn't admit he was wrong. And you can tell me I'm right. And nothing makes me happier than hearing people like, I wish you hadn't wasted 5 years listening to him, but I can't fix it. There's the group that invariably they tend to find me after the fact. I get a lot of, you know what? I tried all the BS, keto, carnivore, low carb, low, like whatever, et cetera, intermittent fasting. And then none of it worked. And then I found your information and it worked. But they kind of have to go through the grinder first till they finally realize that I was right, he said smugly. But you see what, and then there's probably a middle group that you can maybe sway with logical information. I don't know. And for the longest time, I was like, you know what? Forget it. I'm just going to try to provide better information. But I got nothing new to say. So now I'm just going on the offensive. Now it's just like, let's F this. I'm just like, I'm going, going after everybody. To some degree with Solomon stuff. And he's really the first one who's figured out how to get regular content out of me. Right? Like, yeah, we did that. And it was important. And people were like, well, why? I go, look, I'm not going to bother with most people in the industry. Mike and I have specific beef, right? I do not care if people talk crap about me. I don't, because those words don't mean anything, right? If all you've got is to attack me personally instead of proving me wrong, that's your answer. You know I'm right. Mike spent an hour telling bold-faced lies about me. That I won't. You can say anything you want about me, but if you lie about me, we're going to have a problem. Especially because he was too much of a coward to keep that video up because he's hoping people forget about that. That's specifically why that one thing. I'm not going to bother with most of this crap. But that is but anyway, so we did that one, and look at the other stuff I've done with Solomon. We did the GLP-1, the RFL thing. Gonna be kind of one on UD2 with a guy that I helped get into better shape than Mike ever has. We're gonna do one on HIT on Friday. Like, cause I told him that, I go, dude, you can spend your entire career doing nothing but dumping on everyone else. But in the big picture, it doesn't truly achieve anything unless you're giving better information.
For sure. Like even
Right.
people listening to this, there's some people who are going to listen to it strictly for entertainment purposes, and they're not going to
Sure,
get
which
it.
is absolutely, yeah, it's perfectly fine.
And so the person needs to want information to improve themselves, and they need to be seeking good information and be willing to try to separate fact from fiction.
But see that, but that's the problem. And this is the problem I have with the whole do your own research.
You can't.
I may have the background to do it because I know what the science says. You may at this point. The average person, and again, this isn't meant to denigrate anyone. You know what you know, right? Like I know a lot about a couple things, and I know zero about the grand majority of stuff in the world, despite people's claims that Lyle thinks he knows everything. No, I absolutely do not. I know a lot about a couple things. I know a good bit about a few topics that I've become obsessed about. We could, if you ever want to talk about quantum mechanics, love it. Psychology, conditioning, like, yeah, but that's part of what I do. But I don't know about most things. The difference is like I said, if I need to go Google how to fix something in my car, I'm not going to get 10,000 different answers. That's very easy to do your own research by and large. I'm going to find someone, whether it's an auto repair place or the car guys or whatever, and find someone that's established. The average person has no ability to do that with fitness and nutrition because they look at it and go, well, he's big, he's lean, she's hot, she's got a big butt, he's got big arms. When that is the only criteria for knowledge, the average person has no way to distinguish between that. It's then the job of us supposed educators, the supposed evidence-based group, to not just tell people, oh, you eat like an asshole, or B, do your own research. It is our job to help. And that is one thing, again, I'm very much like this in many ways. Like people that don't want my advice, look, I'm not your dad and I'm not your coach and you're not paying me. I don't care what you do. Fundamentally, I don't. Right? You're like, can I do this? Look, you can do whatever you want. Nobody in my group is your parents. You can do whatever you want. Now, if you want my opinion on if it's valid or not, that's different. I will give it. And if you don't like what I have to say, cool. It doesn't I'm here to help the people that want help, and I will give them as much help as possible. Like people used to criticize me. I'd said when I was in the gym, people would come up to me every once in a while and they would say something and I could just tell they were making noise. Like one guy was like, yeah, I want to learn how to squat, but it scares me. And I'm like, well, that's too bad. he wasn't asking me to help him learn how to squat. He was making noise. And I'm just like, yeah, cool. Can I go do my set? But if someone actually comes up and goes, hey, can you help? I will spend 3 hours in the gym with them. I will help people that want help. My books, like I said, frequently people get there after they've read all the other garbage. And now they're like, then I found whether it's flexible dieting or RFL or my rapid fat loss handbook or whatever. Like my way is harder, but that's because that's what works, unfortunately. Like that's what is required. So I will always help people that want that help. That's part of why, now I do paid consultations. I don't do like consistent coaching because I don't have the energy outside of very, very rare situations. But like, yeah, these people like want my advice and I will give them as long as they need to get them to their goals. Now, what they do with that is not my problem. And I know that sounds really dismissive, but like, can't ride people. Like I'm not gonna, I'm not their parent. I can't necessarily, I can't make them do anything. I can give them what I feel is the best advice based on their situation to hopefully get to their goals. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, I'll usually try to troubleshoot that. What I was going to say, so I could dump on AI for a little bit.
Hey, don't dump on it.
I'm going to dump on contextually. AI has its uses in the sense of it's Google for people who are bad at Google. I know there's truth to that. Whatever, you do chat GPT and it's like, because what the internet is doing, or what most of these things are, these large language models especially, they're just scraping the internet. They're doing what happens in every horrible sci-fi movie where, Ultron reads the internet and decides that humanity should be destroyed, which is probably, or at least social media, or they're Lilu in The Fifth Element and do the same thing, right? An AI or large language model, it has no way to discriminate good from bad information. Now, again, there are certain fields where there's such a consensus that that's fine, right? If you ask it, how do I change the oil in my car? I'm not going to have found 10,000 different answers to give you slightly less gibbered responses than it normally gives. But if you ask it to design a training program and 95% of what's out there is garbage, well, garbage in, garbage out. It's just that simple, right? In this particular nutrition, what's the best weight loss diet? How can it know? It can't know what's BS and what's not because all it's doing is aggregating a bunch of data. And if one particular thing happens to have a lot of people doing websites on it, the insulin hypothesis or like calorie intake doesn't, or whatever it is, garbage in, garbage out. Because people will do that. Somebody will ask, can you design a basic workout? And they'll go, well, I asked Chat GPT. And it's the same trash you'd see on any website. It also can't be contextual. When I do consults, I spend half the time asking, like, okay, what have you done in the past? What equipment do you have? How many days per week do you have? Let's look at your biomechanics. Like, let's look at things that contextually, the heuristics that I use to decide what might be optimal in this context. AIs cannot do that at this point. Now, for what you're doing, for example, it can absolutely look at the menus of a given restaurant. It can absolutely compare the macronutrient values to whatever settings you put in it to try to go, okay, this is whatever, higher calories, but lower fat or lower, like whatever you're programming it to do, because that is hard data. You're not going to get, whatever the menu for Sbarro, if Sbarro still exists at the mall, it probably doesn't, or the cookie cup place, right? Like you're not going to get 1,000 different versions of that. And you can parse that data against what is general consensus nutritional beliefs, but you could very easily code that based on your own biases. And you will to one degree or another. And that's not meant to be critical. But whenever we do this type of thing, it is consciously or otherwise, right? Because if you were programming this and you were a carnivore zealot, you would tell it that the healthiest choices are carnivore friendly. And I'm not saying that's good or bad or right or wrong. I mean, it's wrong, but I'm not saying it is, except that it is. But it will all, even with the workout AI things, stupid things that I see, people are programming it based on whatever their personal bias about training is.
Oh, of course.
And that's always going. And again, it's just the nature of the beast until these things become self-aware and self-learning. And we know how well neural nets have worked out over the years, which is not very. Um, and then truly, then it won't matter. By the time the AIs become self-aware, humanity won't be over because they will come to the logical conclusion that
I think if you
humanity
know,
is a virus.
so I think if you know how to point AI in the right direction, so there's something that OpenAI has something called deep research now. So what
Okay.
it can pretty much do is it can go on the web and it can read any article or whatever you want it to do. So if I asked it to create me a nutritional plan based on just the works of Lyle McDonald,
Sure.
right? So if I know how to prompt that, so what I'm saying, it will then ask me contextual questions before providing me the answer. So I feel like we're headed in that direction, but you still have that problem that 99% of the information is shit. And if you don't know how to find that 1%, you're going to get a crap answer back.
But that's predicated on knowing the right prompt.
Exactly.
And that's that. So we just, all we've done is abstract the problem to a new level rather than
Mm.
searching weight loss or whatever. Yeah, you have to know, okay, that's carnivore weight loss approach because somebody's heard that carnivore is best. Like
Mhm.
it's still the same fundamental problem that the average
Sure.
person has no way to sift out the truth from the not from the untruth. And the reality is that a lot of these things that they do work, they don't work for the reasons they say they work, right? Again, I'm going to keep going back to the GLP-1 because that is currently my fundamental goal. By the way, it's available on Amazon. Go search the GLP-1 solution, complete program.
Really.
Just
Put the link
oh,
below.
yeah. There's also, I'll send you the link. People can go read the entire second chapter on a different page that I put together, my landing page. And people think, oh, the drugs just cause weight loss without me having to do anything. And they do, except when they don't. Some people, they have such a profound appetite suppression effect that they do. But I've also seen people make the mistake they make with every other diet. I saw someone ask, so if the GLP-1s control blood sugar, does that mean I can eat more candy? This is called missing the point, right? And people do this with everything. And this is true of fat loss, but again, it's true of other everything else. It's like, oh, well, if I take X, does that mean I don't have to worry about what it'll just fix it? It'll just do all the work for me. And that is certainly true of many fat loss things. But people think that, and they're like 3 months in, they're like, well, I haven't lost any weight. It's like, well, are you paying any attention to your diet? No, I didn't think I had to. Now, some people, again, some people don't. Some people are hyper responders, and other people lose nothing after 20 weeks. Again, this is all in the book and it's not really discussed. There's a percentage of people that don't get massive appetite suppression who are going to have to consciously pay attention to their diet. And this is true of all things. Like, but the information that's out there, how do GLP-1s work? You're like, oh, the fat burner. No, it's not. Oh, it mobilizes fat. Maybe one of them, but it's tiny. Oh, it raises energy expenditure. Maybe one of them, but it hasn't been directly measured. They're appetite suppressants. If you don't eat less, you won't lose weight. There's no magic beyond that. But there's so much misinformation out there. And then on the other side, oh, your gallbladder will fall out. Well, the absolute risk of biliary disease from GLP-1s is 1% versus 0.5%. That's double, but it's not, significant. It's always like that. But the studies, the clickbait studies, double the risk of bile duct conditions. Yeah, that's technically true. There's a book called How to Lie with Statistics. It's just as true now as it was. My
Yeah.
mentor made me read it. Right?
Making
It's like,
way
yeah,
more
it's
smart.
doubling, but it's not like 5 to 10% or 20, like it's 0.5 to 1%. And again, I'm not dismissing when it happens, but the absolute risk is very small. But that's not what the articles are saying. That's not how it's being presented. Oh, GLP-1s cause 60% muscle loss. No, they don't. Occasionally they cause large levels of lean body mass loss. Go on a low carb diet. You'll lose 10 pounds of water in the first 3 days. If you get a DEXA, you'll have lost 10 pounds of lean body mass. How people in a supposedly educated industry, fitness experts, even medical people, are so unclear on this distinction is baffling because people hear, oh, I'm afraid of muscle loss because they're not eating enough protein and resistance training because that's not what they are doing with it. I just, and people wonder why I'm angry all the time. So yeah, so that's still always, not always. Maybe there will be a breakthrough in AI, but
But
how?
I just think like with AI, if you can think critically and use AI, I feel like you have it's kind of almost increased your critical thinking and
Oh,
your,
good.
as opposed to someone who can't at all, then it's a negative towards that.
I I've been doing this a long time.
Mhm.
I started off bitter and cynical, and now it's just worse 30 years later. Your proximity bias is showing.
Probably.
And by that I mean you have the ability to think critically. I have the ability to think critically. That's why you worked at Google. The average person does not. They were never taught. I'm not saying it's not, again, I'm not saying it's like an intellectual failing. They're never taught critical thinking. Schools in this country teach you to repeat what you're told. Most engage in confirmation bias. They go looking for the information that agrees to what they already believe. There is not, I'm sorry. It's yeah, the 1% of people, or however many, whatever percentage of people that are critical thinking or critical thinkers will be able to use I by applying critical thinking. But here's the thing. They don't need it.
Yeah, that's
Like I
fair.
said, I know I'm being a little bit facetious that most chat GPT and AI is just Google for people that suck at Google. I know exactly how to do Google. I'm good at Google. I've been doing it for 30 years. I know how to do Google searches to find what I want. With ChatGPT, you give it a generic thing and it'll help. It's Google for people that stuck at Google. Truly. And that's fine. I'm not saying people need to be 30 years worth of nerd like I am, who grew up on the internet, who grew up having to do this stuff the hard way. I used to have to go to like in college, I had to go to, we had Ovid is the only way to search PubMed, and it was really bad. I just had to go wander the stacks and look at journals and find what I was looking for the hard way because I'm old and crusty. And I walked 10 miles uphill both ways in the snow to school, and I liked it. Like, yeah, I'm an old man yelling at clouds, and I get that. But the average person still doesn't have, but you don't need critical thinking if you're looking up something with a consensus view. And training and nutrition never will. It'll never have one, ever, because it's been the same noise for 100 years. It's just prior to the internet, it was magazines every month, and people would change their training every month. Ken Leisner called it muscle magazine syndrome. Whatever the top pro was doing that month, that's what people would do. Then we had the internet. T Nation, when they started, they ran 3 articles a week. And then they realized that every time they read an article, they would get more hits and they would sell more supplements. So it was five a week, 10 a week. They released like 7 articles a day, half of which contradict one another. Now, in the era of social media, of Instagram, of TikTok, of whatever, you can find the new thing that you must do, shouldn't do, or doing wrong, or doing right, never do, always do, every 10 seconds. And it's just going to accelerate. I get served these reels all the time on Facebook, and they just make me cry because it's just some big dumb dude going, I did this exercise and my triceps blew up. I'm like, you're already big. Don't tell people that this exercise did anything. But that's how you get clicks because that's the current trend.
Yeah.
The big X's. Know the difference. Do this. Don't ever do this. Why you should never do this. Why you should always do this. Every day there's something different. It's any wonder people are.
The finance industry is actually exactly the same, where people fall for the latest trend or the gimmick, and people sell courses on it.
Oh yeah.
And people who actually have done well financially, they forget how they started. And then their group that, they do the exact same thing, but they're like, well, I'm giving better advice than this group, but their advice is still not honest. So I feel like they are different area that are kind of similar, where if you search how to make money, there's no consensus answer either. Right?
I'm sure. I mean, I used to get, for a while, I was getting served videos on YouTube about, stock market. And of course, the whole thing with AMC and GameStop, like that brought in, and whatever, I did too, and made some money and lost some money. And, but I get served those things, and everyone has a slightly different opinion. And people don't realize that these are billion-dollar hedge funds. And for every one thing that makes them money, there's gambling is the same way. There's all kinds of gambling systems. And I used to read those books back in the day, and they're so funny because the honest writers literally said, I make more money from the books than I've ever made from my own system. But that's very rare. And I know in finances, I got a buddy who did international finance for a while in Japan and Taiwan. He's like, so in the fitness industry, you sell courses for $150. This is a big thing in the 2000s. And the logic being that, oh, a trainer who buys this course, if they retain one new client a week, 3 sessions, that will pay for itself within
Yeah.
a month. Now in finance, the courses are $10,000 for a weekend of and finance people will pay it because if they're, again, making $1 million trades, if this course lets me make 1% more over the course of the year, it will pay for it 100 times over. And I totally get that. But when you've got the stock market, which is literally a lottery, unless you're doing insider trading or you're Nancy Pelosi, who has 100% hit record, right? It's all luck, right? There's all the, and I just love those things. And they're like, yeah, we had a monkey throw darts or a chicken pick stocks, and it actually does better than the hedge fund. It is. It's a total, like, yes, are there better and worse principles? Are there stocks that are, utilities are always going to go up. There are certain things but they're going to go up very slowly. If you're a speculative day trader hoping for the next big hit, it's luck.
Well, it's
And
funny.
much,
If you were so independently wealthy from investing, you wouldn't sell courses. So that is actually the business for these people. Usually is to sell the course.
I spent a little bit of time years ago on one of those, like, it was back in the forum days still. And there were people like these magic finance courses. And they're like, I figured out how to make $1 million a month on Google, and I'm going to sell you that course for $10. Like,
Wow.
so I have a question for you. I go, okay, if you've got a secret system making you so much money and you give it to other people, it's no longer a secret system. Why don't you just make your $1 million and be quiet? Because yes, they make their money
You
selling
do.
selling the courses to gullible idiots. I was going to do a book back in the day, back in the magazine days, back when like Popular Science had those little ads. And I was going to write a book, and it's called How to Get Rich Writing a Book. And I was going to sell for like $9.95. The key is to sell it just cheaply enough that people will go, maybe this is worth it. Maybe this is worth spending money on because maybe it's the secret. And this was going to be the entirety of the book. The way to make millions writing books is to write a book titled How to Make Millions Writing Books and Sell it to Idiots. Because pre-internet, pre-reviews, before anyone could go on and say what it really was, that absolutely worked. I would have sold 10,000 copies, 100,000 copies before anyone caught on, and I would have made my money and could have retired. So yeah, exactly. So the internet business stuff is just as bad, or it can be. Like, yeah, I'm sure there are people that are well-established traders that are more successful than not that can give you strategies, how to do the research, how to look at the candles. Like, I know just enough about this to be dangerous, obviously. Like, they're to do analysis, but I used to go on like Reddit Wall Street Bets, and there's like, here's my analysis of this thing. And then they would draw these lines through it. And I'm like, looks like a duck, because this is astrology. This is phrenology. This is not, oh, well, it's, and I'll see these articles. It's like, oh, we've got a triple drop candle, and statistically that predicts, and that's great. And what people do is go, oh, when I've done my analysis, it worked. Well, yeah, once. Now talk about the 99 times that you lost money, right? We were, back in the day, we had the pickup artist stuff. That was super hilarious in the 2000s, all this stuff.
The game. Yeah.
There was a whole internet saying everybody had courses on this stuff. And then they would tell these turgid stories about how they went to the bar, did this, ran the cube, and the double negative reverse hit, neg hit, and all this other stuff. How they picked up this girl. And I'm like, okay, look, you're a 22-year-old at a college bar. I'm sorry, this is a pretty high target environment. I knew a guy in college, just as a social experiment, walked around the dorms. Knock, knock, knock. Hi, you want to have sex? 1 in 4 said yes.
Wow.
It's simply a numbers game. But these people remember the one time it worked. They don't tell the 99 stories when they got shot down and it failed.
Yeah, it's like I'll tell you about their wins at the casino, and they don't tell you about their losses. So it seems like everyone wins at the casino.
Yes, exactly. And that's just because we don't talk about the negatives by and large. And it's even, again, going back to the gambling system things, they will all tell you that, look, the only way to make money gambling is you have to have money to begin with, because you have to have enough to cover the invariable losses. It's the same thing in the stock market. Can you make a little bit like, yes, ignoring the short squeeze of GME, that was an anomaly that will never happen again, right? Like for the average person, like, okay, I got $1,000. I'm going to buy this stock. Cool. Maybe it doubles if you're lucky. All right. You've made
Yeah.
$1,000. Now, if you've got $1 million that you can invest and buy a million, whatever, however many tens of thousands of shares, and it goes up $1 or it doubles, you can make $1 million. But you got even selling options. If you can't afford enough shares, you're like, yeah, okay, you can sell options for $25 a week. And that's fine. It's still income. And if you've only got $100, that adds up over the course of the year. But basically, you got to be rich to get rich.
Mhm.
But nobody wants to say that. Not
Right. They want to hear that you got in at 1 penny on the cryptocurrency and overnight it went to $200 and you're
sure. Yeah.
that's the story
Well,
everyone, right?
even with Bitcoin and all the crypto thing, and I played with that too, and I made some money and I lost some money because it's the nature of it, right? Like, yeah, when Bitcoin, I remember when it started, and it was 0.00045 of a penny or whatever, and people like, okay, this is a thing, and now 20 years later, it's trading between 30 and 75,000. The volatility on that stuff is absurd. So yeah, there were people that made billions off Bitcoin, although they can't ever sell it because then the price will tank, right? Like they're Bitcoin billionaires in their wallet.
Okay. Yeah.
They don't actually have that money because they can't sell it. And then, of course, all the new coins came out, and some were meme coins, and some were probably legitimate, and as much as crypto is ever legitimate. And yeah, and they're expecting the same kind of returns. It's like maybe in 20 years, Dogecoin will go from 15 cents to $15. In the short term, no, it's actually down from 8. It's down to 8 now because, whatever it is. And yeah, we want it. People are still during the GME thing. Every post on our Wall Street Bets is like, here's the next short squeeze. Here's going to be the next big one. And they were
Silver's been a short now. I remember.
yeah, and they're
Everyone's
like, and they were all pump and dumps, and they were all just people like they were doing it like, oh, if I can get a bunch of people to buy, I can sell
blindly hit.
mine. And
Yeah.
that because GME was just a total anomaly. It came out of nowhere that happened, but that became the thing. Then we had, NFTs, we had all this other, but people, and this is just human nature. People want magic. Now, another criticism, and then and then we'll wrap it up. Supplements, right? Because for most of my career, I've been like, look, most supplements are crap. But actually, let me go further back than that. Here's how I really got into this field. So, high school, I got into sports. I was a cyclist, did martial arts, gymnastics. I went to UCLA to study exercise science. Initially, I wanted to be an underpaid, overworked coach. Then I wanted to be an underpaid, overworked physical therapist. But then when I got into competitive sports, cycling and mainly inline skating, then that's when I really got into this. And I read all the ads. I read all the magazines. I wanted there to be magic. I was a decent but not great athlete, and I wanted to be better than I was. So I would go bother my exercise physiology professor, Dr. Eric Sternlicht. Every week, I would go bug the hell out of him. What about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? And he would tell what the science was. And I'm like, okay, I better get in on this. That's when I started going to the biomedical library and looking up studies, because it was obvious to me that what was being claimed in the magazines and what was true was not the same. There's actually a famous story. Weider did a supplement. They claimed a study had been done at UCLA, where I went to school, that they just made up out of just whole cloth. UCLA sued them and won. Said you literally made up a study that we never did. So I got into the science of, and of course, nutrition and training. And I'm like, I wanted to do everything to try to optimize my own performance. And then I got out of college and I'm like, what am I going to do with my life? And I was a trainer for a while. And I'm like, I turned my own obsession into a career. I was basically just trying to make myself better, like most, right? Most psychologists are nuts and they're trying to fix themselves. Most dietitians were overweight and they're trying to fix themselves. I was an athlete trying to be better. And I'm like, well, I'm good at this. And I started writing on the internet because I like hearing myself talk, obviously. And people seemed to like what I had to say. And I wrote my first book and I'm like, all right, cool. I guess this is my career now. And that's how I've made my living since 1998. I haven't worked a real job in forever and don't intend to. People always like, God, you must be so busy. No, not unless you count watching TV and playing video games to be busy. I don't and being belligerent on the internet. I spend a lot of time doing that. So, yeah. So people are like, some new supplement comes out, and I'm like, the data, like, you just hate supplements. I go, no, no, to the contrary. I go, look, over however many years, whenever this is being made, I've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of products come down the line. You know how many are left? Like five, right? There's like five things that are still, I've seen everything come and go. So this is what the sun, people are like, "But maybe this is the one." I'm like, statistically speaking, when 99.9% of everything is garbage, the likelihood of this one being the exception. Now, 5 years from now, if it's still around, like training styles, maybe it's worth considering. It's not that I hate supplements or I'm anti supplement. I am anti bullshit. And again, statistically speaking, when if 99% of something is garbage, you are naive to think that this one might be the real one. But, and I get that. I wanted there to be magic too. It's not,
All
no,
right.
you don't want keto diets to have a metabolic advantage. Au contraire, I hate dieting too. I wish if there were a way to lose fat without cutting calories, I would be a billionaire because I would tell you about it. But there's not. If I
Yeah.
believed in that, you would know about it. I want it to be true, but it's not. And until people realize that, they're gonna have a bad time because they're gonna spin. I mean, I've had people consult with me. They've spun their wheels for 10 to 20 years, buying into they've done everything. They've done any approach you care to name to no good result. And then they're finally like, then I found your stuff and realized that, at least one person wasn't talking total bollocks. And then I give them something and it works. Or they just go on GLP-1s.
All right. So now what I'm gonna do to finish things off today is I'm gonna throw some pictures on the screen.
Oh
Tell
gosh.
me the first thing that comes to mind, or if you have a story.
Oh
Uh,
no.
Here is Dan Duchesne.
Dan was probably the most unique person in the industry. He, in the 70s and 80s, was the steroid guru. He was also the most hated man in the industry. He's very divisive. People loved him or hated him. I was friends with him in the late 90s because of his Body Opus book. Met him, and he was sort of a secondary mentor to me. I learned a lot from him, and he unfortunately passed very young.
And do you have a story from when you spent a few days with them in San Diego?
Yeah. So Dan knew three things, which was bodybuilding, high-end stereo equipment, and recumbent bicycles. Those were the only things he cared about. And he was determined to teach me how to ride one of those things. So we went out and I tried to learn how, because I'd been a cyclist, but recumbent bicycles are a whole separate thing. So I spent an hour in his parking lot and then he's like, okay, we're going to go ride with the recumbent bicycle people down at Dennis, but just be forewarned. These people are weirdos. And it's true. Recumbent cyclists are just there's a unique psychology. It's like Linux people, quite honestly. You'll
Okay.
understand, right?
Yeah.
Like they are this small subculture that wants everybody to do their little thing. And recumbent bicyclists are exactly like that. They try to convince you to join the cult and drink the Kool-Aid. So Duchesne is missed. Said he was probably one of the most creative people in the industry, even though he was wrong quite a
Uh,
bit. But he
all
was a
right.
genius, no doubt.
What is an author who I don't know too well, Robert Sapolsky?
He's the man I want to be when I grow up without the beard and the hair. So Robert Sapolsky is a Stanford-trained neuroscientist who spent the summers in Africa studying baboons to examine the role of stress in physiology. So that's why he looks a little bit feral. He spent every summer for 2 decades in the bush, living with the Maasai and studying baboons. He wrote a book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers many, many years ago. That's probably one of my top 5 favorite books. Like I usually read it annually. He has the ability to take very complicated science and make it not only readable. Many pop science writers are not good at that. Many academics are very bad at writing for general public. Not only understandable, but engaging and funny. I happen to disagree with him completely about the free will thing, but that's a whole separate podcast. That's his most recent book. But he is basically a behaviorist who studies stress He wrote a book called Behave that's 800 pages that I cannot bring myself to read. But either him or Louise Burke, who is an Australian sports science and nutrition researcher and brilliant person, is who I want to be when I grow up.
Awesome. All right. So next couple are memes. Tell me what you think when you see the meme.
Oh no. Oh yeah, no, I put that one up, and Facebook said that I was inciting violence and gave me no, like no joke. And I appealed it. I'm like, wait, really? But it's true. They are that I maintain that. How folks have the ability to post 4 times a day to their Instagram and make 3 YouTube videos. Like, when are you working on improving your craft? Right? Like back in the 2000s when internet business first became a thing, Ryan Lee, the whole sales funnel and mailing list thing, I would see fitness professionals go, I read 4 books on marketing a week. Why don't you read 4 books on training a week and get better at your job rather than being good at putting up YouTube shorts and making pretty YouTube thumbnails? Because when they do this, when I see someone like Milo putting up 4 shorts a day or whatever the hell it is in the same video every 2 days, like, this is why you're so bad at reading science, because you're not very good at your job, but you're real good at social media.
Yeah. I wonder, we talked about this earlier, but it's like distribution, social media, if that how the job is viewed, it probably shouldn't be how the job is
Well,
viewed, but it's becoming.
I don't know if it's so much that it's viewed that way, but it's what you have to do, right? Like, I was lucky. I entered the industry. I was the only one, right? I
I
was
mean,
lucky, and I'll be the first one to say it. Am I good at my job? I like to think so. I was in the right place at the right time. I never marketed. I just wrote. I just established credibility through my information. Anyone entering the industry now has such an uphill battle to gain any sort of awareness. And on social media, when there is literally a new hotness every 2 minutes, if you are not posting every day on your Instagram, if you are not posting YouTube video once or twice a week, people will forget about you. Advertising has always worked the same way. There's a reason that during the Super Bowl, Coke will run the same commercial 37 times, because as soon as someone sees the Pepsi commercial in 2 minutes, they will forget about Coke. On social media, and I don't know how they have time to do it, to do 2 YouTube videos, post to Instagram, TikToks, Twitter, if they're still, or shitter, Xitter. I pronounce XI like the Chinese she, because that's what it is. I've done Twitter for 3 days years ago, and it made Facebook look like a bastion of calm and reasoned discussion, and I just left. But the amount you have to do to gain any sort of awareness of you is staggering. That becomes your full-time job, essentially. And I'm crap at social media. People like, oh, I joined your Instagram for fitness information. Buddy, you were in the wrong place. I mainly put up dumb memes, dad jokes, and occasional content. Like, I can't even think of anything to put up more than once a week. How these people come up with this trite crap to put up on their Instagram multiple times a day, I don't have an idea. I can think of dumb stuff, but I can't think of trite fitness stuff. So,
there
but
must be tremendous amount of pressure to do that. It's a,
I
they
think
don't,
it's simply required in the modern era to not only get an audience, but keep an audience. Because if you're not doing it, they're going to go find someone who is.
all right, last one here. It's not a meme. It's a picture I got off your website here.
Yeah. So years ago, during a particularly bad depression, this was like 2011 through 2012, I was basically living in my cave, very unhappy, and a therapist suggested that, and I just didn't interact with human beings. And they suggested I go volunteer somewhere to put me around people. Now, my mentor had wanted me to volunteer at a dog shelter for years, and I still kick myself that I didn't do it. So I went to the Austin Humane Society and walked dogs. And what's hilarious, the goal of my therapist was to get me around humans. I didn't know the name of a single person at the shelter. I knew the name of every dog in the kennels because that's just the way my brain works. And I loved it. It was probably the best couple of years of my life. And I forget which dog this was. We had a dog come in that was in a lot of trouble. two cherry eyes, terrible mange. Yeah. And I put something up on my website that was like, look, if you like me at all, please donate. And I get called into the office like 3 days later, which usually means I'm in trouble. That has been so I go in and I go, I didn't do it. And they're like, no, 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 no. They're like, we have started getting these donations from your website and we don't know where they're coming from. And I go, well, I did this article. And the long and the short of it was like $15,000,
Wow.
which blew my mind. And I think that's probably for Loretta,
Hmm.
which was this dog that she was able to get her medical care. They saved her eyes. And because of me.
Awesome. Well, sorry to end it on a bit of an emotional note there, but Lyle, thank you so much for your time today. Greatly
Everyone.
appreciate it. Where can everyone find you?
So my website is bodyrecomposition.com and I don't update it a lot, but there's like 400 articles. It's pretty much anything you want to find is probably on there. My books, the majority of my books can be bought at store.bodyrecomposition.com. The new one, the GLP-1 book, is actually only on Amazon, Kindle and physical book. I decided to try Amazon for once. Probably the best place to find me is my Facebook group, which is called Body Recomposition. It's actually really active. I'm on it daily. And what I always like to point out about it is because of the nature of my group and kind of who I am, I attract experts in like every field. It's mind boggling to me. I have like 5 top physios. I've got like, and people ask these questions about stuff I've never even heard of, like various medical conditions. We will always have 3 people that have gone through it, 1 clinical care nurse who deals with it, and 1 physician who's an expert in it. Like I learn from the people in my group daily. So like, and I mean, a lot of it is, general fat loss and training and nutrition, but a lot of rehab questions. And like I said, every once in a while, I hate to say weirdness because it has connotations that I want, but just stuff that's so unique. Like I know a lot about a little and a little about a lot, but we have experts in my group. We got some ultra runners, endurance coaches, like you name it, they're in my group and you can get just about any question answered that you want. So that's probably in my Instagram. You can go follow me. I barely update it at McDonald Lyle. And I've got a YouTube channel called Lyle McDonald is Right. Because I needed to put something on there. And I tried last year to get into consistent updates. And I started a series that I knew I was never going to finish. And then the book took over and I've kind of given up on it. So honestly, Solomon Nelson's YouTube channel is where you're going to find more content from me. Because like I said, he's the only one who's figured out how to get regular content. And that's to ask me questions. Like we talk for hours and then he does all the editing and all the work on the back end because I won't do it because I'm lazy. Truly, I am. So whenever he wants, we're going to talk about high intensity training on Friday for 5 or 6 hours. And he'll put that together. So that's probably the best place to find video content.
Awesome. Well, appreciate your time.
Thank you, sir.